Fort Benning stood silent in the morning light. Dew clung to manicured grass as the sun cast long shadows across the parade grounds. A solitary figure moved with deliberate steps toward the podium erected at the center of the field. He walked with the slight limp of a man who had spent decades inside the cramped confines of an armored beast. Captain Jack Callahan adjusted his dress uniform as he approached the stage. 62 years had weathered his face like tanned leather stretched across high cheekbones. Deep creases framed eyes that had witnessed both glory and horror through the narrow vision blocks of an M1A1 Abrams tank. Today was supposed to be his day of honor. 30 years since Operation Desert Storm, 3 decades since he had led his tank company against the Republican Guard in the largest armored engagement since World War II. The crowd of dignitaries and young soldiers waited as Callahan surveyed the gathering with a stoic expression that betrayed nothing of the pain radiating through his abdomen. The announcer's voice boomed across the parade grounds. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Silver Star recipient, Distinguished Service Cross honoree, and Tank Commander Extraordinaire, Captain Jack Thunderbolt Callahan." Applause erupted as Callahan climbed the 3 steps to the podium. The morning Georgia sun glinted off the medals adorning his chest. 6 rows of ribbons representing nearly 40 years of service. The silver star at his collar caught the light as he turned to face the audience. Beneath his dress blues, a body that had once been iron hard now concealed a secret Callahan had kept from everyone but his doctors. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Terminal, 3 months to live at best. He gripped the sides of the podium as the first wave of pain washed over him. The specialists at Walter Reed had warned him about this. The painkillers were becoming less effective. Each day brought new agony as the cancer spread through his body like enemy forces flanking a defensive position. 30 years ago, Callahan began, his voice resonant despite the fire in his gut. "I commanded Thunder Company, 2nd Battalion, 34th Armor. We were part of the largest armored force America had assembled since World War II. The memories flooded back as he spoke. The endless desert, the choking diesel fumes inside the tank, the smell of cordite after firing the main gun. The way time seemed to slow during combat until each heartbeat lasted an eternity. We faced Saddam Hussein's elite Republican Guard, Soviet-built T-72 tanks that were supposed to be among the best in the world." A hint of pride crept into his voice. But they had never faced the M1A1 Abrams. They had never faced American tankers. Another wave of pain, sharper this time. Callahan gripped the podium tighter, his knuckles whitening as he fought to maintain his composure. The crowd of young soldiers watched with rapt attention, unaware of the battle raging inside their hero's body. At the Battle of Norfolk, we engaged the enemy at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. Our depleted uranium sabot rounds punched through their frontal armor like it was cardboard. Callahan paused, momentarily lost in the memory of tracer rounds cutting through the desert night. We could see them with our thermal sights. They couldn't see us at all. The pain intensified. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead. The words on his prepared speech began to blur. Callahan blinked hard, trying to focus. "In 72 hours of combat, my company destroyed 67 enemy vehicles without losing a single tank." His voice cracked slightly. "Not a single American tanker in my company died that day." The ground seemed to tilt beneath his feet. The faces in the crowd blurred together. Callahan tried to continue, but the words wouldn't come. The last thing he remembered was the rush of air as he fell, and the thunder of boots as officers rushed to catch him before he hit the stage. Consciousness returned slowly. White ceiling, the antiseptic smell of a hospital room, the steady beep of monitors. Callahan turned his head slightly to see a familiar face in a chair beside his bed. Robert Hayes, once the gunner in Callahan's tank, now a lieutenant colonel on the verge of retirement himself. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Thunderbolt." Hayes smiled, though concern shadowed his eyes. "You gave everyone quite a scare." "How long?" Callahan's voice was raspy. "About 6 hours. They've got you on some serious painkillers." Hayes leaned forward. "Jack, they ran tests while you were out. The doctors told me about the cancer. Why didn't you say something?" Callahan turned his gaze back to the ceiling. "Not your burden to bear, Bobby." Hayes shook his head. 30 years side by side, and you still think you have to carry everything alone." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Finally, Hayes spoke again, his voice lower. "There's something I need to tell you, something big. The Pentagon has a new program. They're calling it Project Legacy. Callahan turned his head slightly, curiosity overriding the dull ache that pervaded his body. They're collecting the experience and knowledge of veteran tank commanders, Hayes continued, using it to program the next generation of AI-controlled tanks. Autonomous vehicles that learn from the best. Robots replacing tankers? Callahan frowned. You know how I feel about that, Bobby. Hayes nodded. I know, but they want you specifically. Your combat record in Desert Storm is still unmatched. 6 Iraqi tanks in under 4 minutes at Norfolk. No one's ever done better. I was just doing my job. Callahan shifted uncomfortably in the hospital bed. Any decent tank commander would have done the same. That's not what the history books say. Hayes pulled a folder from his briefcase. The program directors want to meet with you. They think your experience could save lives in the next war. Callahan was silent for a long moment, contemplating. The cancer was a death sentence. 3 months of increasing pain and decreasing dignity. But there was something else troubling him about this proposal. They'll run medical tests, he said finally. Standard procedure for any military program. They'll find out about the cancer. Hayes hesitated. Yes, they would. And they'll reject me. Callahan's voice hardened. I won't be pitied, Bobby. I won't be the dying old man they humor before sending him off to hospice. Before Hayes could respond, a nurse entered the room with a clipboard. Captain Callahan, how are you feeling? Your vitals are looking better. I'm fine. When can I get out of here? The nurse checked his chart. The doctor wants to keep you overnight for observation. You can be discharged tomorrow morning if everything remains stable. After the nurse left, Callahan turned back to Hayes. I need you to keep this between us. No one else needs to know. Hayes looked troubled. Jack, you can't just ignore this. There are treatments. I've seen the specialists at Walter Reed. Callahan cut him off. 3 months, maybe 4 with aggressive treatment that would make me too sick to get out of bed. That's not how I'm going out. The conversation was interrupted by Callahan's phone ringing. Hayes picked it up from the bedside table and checked the screen. Unknown number. He handed the phone to Callahan. Callahan. His voice was stronger now, instinctively adopting the commanding tone he had used for decades. Captain Callahan, this is William Davidson. The voice on the other end was deep, authoritative. Callahan's eyebrows rose slightly. Colonel William Davidson had been his regimental commander in Desert Storm, the man who had personally pinned the Silver Star to Callahan's chest after the war. Colonel, it's been a long time. A chuckle came through the phone. It's just William now, retired 5 years ago. I saw the news about what happened at the ceremony today. How are you holding up? I'll survive. The irony of his words wasn't lost on Callahan. Good, because I needed to talk to you about something important. Something that can't be discussed over the phone. Are you free tomorrow evening? Callahan glanced at Hayes, who was watching with evident curiosity. I should be discharged by then. Excellent. I'll send a car to pick you up at 1900 hours. And Jack, this is a private matter, just between us. The line went dead. Callahan handed the phone back to Hayes, his mind racing. Davidson, Hayes asked, what does he want? I don't know. Callahan stared out the hospital window at the darkening sky. But I intend to find out. The black SUV arrived precisely at 1900 hours the following evening. Callahan had been discharged that morning and had spent the day at his small apartment near Fort Benning, resting and preparing for whatever Davidson had in mind. He had taken his pain medication an hour before to ensure he would be clear-headed but comfortable during the meeting. The driver said nothing as Callahan slid into the back seat. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see in from the outside. They drove for nearly an hour, leaving the familiar surroundings of Columbus, Georgia, and heading into the countryside. Finally, they turned onto a private road guarded by a security checkpoint. The driver showed identification, and they were waved through. The road led to a sprawling compound surrounded by a high fence. Modern buildings with reflective glass windows stood in stark contrast to the rural Georgia landscape. The SUV pulled up to the main entrance, where William Davidson himself waited. Time had been kind to Davidson. At 65, his hair had gone completely white, but he still stood ramrod straight, his 6'2" frame as imposing as it had been 3 decades earlier. He wore a tailored suit that suggested his post-military career had been lucrative. Jack, Davidson extended his hand as Callahan emerged from the vehicle. You look good, liar. Callahan smiled despite himself as they shook hands. But I appreciate the sentiment. Davidson led him through security scanners and into an elevator that descended deep below the surface. After I retired from the Army, I started a defense contracting company. Davidson Strategic Systems. We specialize in autonomous weapon platforms. Killer robots? Callahan raised an eyebrow. Never figured you for the mad scientist type, William. Davidson laughed. Not mad, just forward-thinking. The future of warfare is changing, Jack. Fewer soldiers in harm's way, more precision, less collateral damage. The elevator doors opened to reveal a vast underground facility. Engineers and technicians move purposefully between workstations. Large screens displayed data and simulations. But what caught Callahan's attention was the enormous hangar space beyond the operations center. Inside sat what appeared to be an M1 Abrams tank, but with subtle differences. The profile was sleeker, the turret configuration slightly altered. Is that what I think it is? Callahan asked, moving toward the viewing window. The M1A3 Abrams, pride filled Davidson's voice. The most advanced main battle tank ever created. Depleted uranium armor, new generation reactive armor tiles, improved power plant, enhanced fire control systems, and the option for remote operation or full autonomy. Callahan studied the machine with a professional eye. Impressive, but why show me? I'm hardly in a position to place an order. Davidson's expression grew serious. I'm facing a problem, Jack. The Pentagon is running a competition next month to determine which autonomous tank system they'll adopt. My company is up against Raytheon Davis Technologies. Raymond Walsh's outfit. Callahan remembered the ambitious officer who had always been Davidson's rival. The same. Davidson nodded. They've developed a system called Atlas, Autonomous Tactical Lethal Assault System. It's good, very good, but it lacks something crucial. And what's that? Davidson looked Callahan directly in the eye. The human element, the instinct, the experience that no algorithm can replicate. That's where you come in. Understanding dawn. You want me to drive your tank against Atlas. I want you to command a crew in my tank against Atlas, Davidson corrected, to demonstrate that the perfect combination isn't replacing humans with machines, but enhancing humans with machine assistance. Callahan was silent for a long moment, considering. Why me specifically? There are younger tank commanders with more recent combat experience. None with your record. Davidson handed him a tablet displaying Callahan's service file. 6 enemy tanks in under 4 minutes at Norfolk. 12 confirmed kills at 73 Easting. The longest range confirmed kill in Desert Storm at 3,650 meters. You're a legend, Jack, the best there ever was. The praise felt hollow against the reality of the cancer eating away at his insides. I'm also dying, William. Cancer. 3 months at best. If Davidson was surprised, he didn't show it. I know. Robert Hayes told me. Callahan's jaw tightened. Hayes had no right. He's concerned about you. Davidson cut him off. As am I, but this isn't charity, Jack. I need the best tank commander alive for this test. That's you. The fact that it gives you one last chance to make a difference, to leave a legacy, is secondary. The words struck home. Legacy, what would his be? Medals in a display case? War stories that would fade with those who remembered them? Or one final mission that could shape the future of armored warfare? When is this competition? Callahan asked, his resistance waning. 3 weeks from now, at the Nevada test range. We'll have 2 weeks to train beforehand. Callahan turned back to the M1A3, studying its lines. Despite everything, he felt a familiar stirring. The call of the tank commander. The challenge of battle, even a simulated one. Who would my crew be? Davidson smiled, sensing victory. I've selected 3 of the best, young but experienced. They need a leader, someone who can teach them what can't be learned from manuals. Callahan nodded slowly. 3 weeks. I should still be functioning well enough by then. So you're in? Davidson extended his hand. Callahan took it, his grip firm despite his illness. I'm in. The next morning, Callahan stood before the M1A3 Abrams in the underground hangar, now properly dressed in tanker's overalls. Davidson had arranged for a private apartment within the facility where he could stay during training. The medical staff had been briefed on his condition and would provide necessary care discreetly. She's beautiful, isn't she? The voice came from behind him. Callahan turned to see a woman in her early 30s approaching. She wore the same dark blue overalls as Callahan, with the Davidson Strategic Systems logo on the breast pocket. Sarah Thompson. She extended her hand. Vehicle Systems Specialist. I'll be your driver. Callahan shook her hand, noting the firm grip. Jack Callahan. I know who you are, Captain Thunderbolt. A hint of admiration colored her voice. Your engagement at Norfolk is still taught at the armor school. Before Callahan could respond, 2 more figures approached. One was a tall, athletic man in his mid-30s with the confident bearing of an officer. The other was younger, with the wiry build of someone who spent more time with computers than in the gym. Lieutenant Michael Rodriguez. The taller man saluted crisply. Former intelligence officer, current systems integration specialist, I'll be your gunner. James Wilson. The younger man nodded. Technical specialist, I'll be handling the loader's position, though this beauty has an autoloader for the main gun. I'll be managing the secondary systems and communications. Callahan studied his new crew. Young, technically proficient, no doubt, but untested in actual combat. Have any of you ever served in an actual tank unit? Rodriguez and Thompson exchanged glances. I did a rotation with the 1st Armored Division, Rodriguez offered, training exercises in Germany. I've logged over 500 hours in Abrams simulators, Thompson added, plus actual driving time during testing phases. Wilson shrugged. I'm a tech guy. I make the systems talk to each other. Callahan nodded, keeping his expression neutral. Not ideal, but he had worked with green crews before. First things first. We need to understand what we're up against. What can you tell me about Atlas? Rodriguez pulled out a tablet and brought up a file. Autonomous Tactical Lethal Assault System. Developed by Raytheon Davis Technologies. It's essentially an M1A2 Abrams chassis fitted with advanced AI systems, additional sensors, and no crew compartment, allowing for more ammunition storage and better protection. Its main advantage is processing speed, Wilson added. It can calculate firing solutions in microseconds, accounting for variables that would take a human gunner much longer to process. Callahan frowned. So it's faster and carries more ammunition. What are its weaknesses? Creativity, Thompson suggested. AI systems follow patterns and protocols. They can learn, but they struggle with the unexpected. That's our angle, Rodriguez agreed. We need to do something it won't anticipate. Callahan walked around the M1A3, familiarizing himself with the modifications. Tell me about our tank. What makes it special? Thompson smiled, patting the hull affectionately. The Paladin, as we call her, combines autonomous capabilities with human override. Every system can be controlled manually or left to the AI assistant, the best of both worlds. She has enhanced thermal imaging, Rodriguez continued. Effective target identification out to 5,000 meters. Main gun is the improved 120mm M256A2 smoothbore, with programmable multi-purpose rounds in addition to standard sabot and heat. The real magic is in the integration, Wilson added. The tactical awareness system creates a complete battlefield picture, identifying threats and calculating optimal responses. But the human crew makes the final decisions. Callahan placed a hand on the hull, feeling the cool metal beneath his palm. So different from the tanks he had commanded in the desert, yet fundamentally the same. A tool of war designed to protect its crew while bringing overwhelming firepower to bear on the enemy. When do we start training? He asked. Now, Davidson said, approaching from behind. The simulator is ready. I want you to run tactical scenarios until you function as a unit. Then we'll move to live exercises with the actual tank. Callahan nodded, feeling a familiar tension building in his chest. Not the pain of cancer, but the focused anticipation that preceded combat operations. Let's get to work. The simulator resembled the interior of the M1A3, with all stations fully functional. Callahan settled into the commander's position, muscle memory taking over despite the decades that had passed since he last commanded a tank in combat. The commander's independent thermal viewer came online, showing a digitized desert landscape. Scenario 1, Davidson's voice came through the intercom. Standard engagement. Multiple enemy vehicles at varied ranges. This is a baseline assessment to see how you function as a crew. Callahan surveyed the virtual battlefield through his viewer. Driver, move to hold down position behind that ridge at 2 o'clock. Gunner, scan for targets from Sector 1 through 5. Wilson, monitor battle network for any contacts outside our direct view. They moved with reasonable coordination for a first exercise. Thompson guided the tank smoothly into position, using the terrain for cover. Rodriguez located the first target quickly, a simulated T-80 at 2,100 meters. Target, tank, 2 o'clock, 2,000 meters, Rodriguez reported. Identified, Callahan confirmed. Sabot, fire when ready. Rodriguez engaged the fire control system. On the way. The simulator rocked with the simulated recoil of the main gun. On the screen, the target erupted in flames. Target destroyed, Rodriguez reported. Scanning for next target. They engaged 5 more targets in quick succession, destroying all but one, which managed to get off a shot that struck their frontal armor before Rodriguez could fire. Simulation complete, Davidson announced. Not bad for a first run. The hit you took would have been deflected by the frontal armor, but in a real engagement, that's still too close. Callahan nodded, dissatisfied. Response times are too slow. We need to cut at least 2 seconds from target identification to firing. The AI could reduce that time by half, Wilson pointed out. We're not here to let the computer do our job, Callahan said firmly. We're here to prove humans still belong in tanks. Again, from the beginning, Thompson more aggressive positioning this time. Rodriguez, I want you engaging targets within 3 seconds of identification. They ran the simulation again and again. By the 5th iteration, their performance had improved markedly. Target engagement times dropped from 7 seconds to just under 4. Movement was more coordinated, with Thompson anticipating Callahan's commands and positioning the tank optimally without explicit instruction. After 8 hours in the simulator, Davidson called a halt. That's enough for today. Rest and be ready to resume at 0700 tomorrow. As the crew dispersed for the evening, Callahan remained in the simulator, reviewing the day's exercises. Davidson joined him, sitting in the loader's position. They're good, Callahan admitted. Thompson has excellent terrain reading skills. Rodriguez is a natural gunner. Even Wilson contributes well despite his lack of traditional tank experience. But, Davidson prompted, but they're not a crew yet. They're still individuals performing tasks, not a single unit functioning as one. Callahan brought up the replay of their last exercise. Watch here. Rodriguez spots the target, but there's a delay before he announces it. Thompson adjusts position only after I give the order, not in anticipation of the engagement. Davidson nodded. That's why I brought you in. Technical skills can be taught. Crew integration takes experience and leadership. Callahan closed the simulation program and turned to face Davidson. There's something you're not telling me about Atlas. What is it? Davidson hesitated before responding. Atlas isn't just an AI system. It's been programmed with the tactical knowledge of dozens of tank commanders. Their experiences, decisions, and instincts have been analyzed and incorporated into its decision-making algorithms. A chill ran down Callahan's spine. Including mine? Davidson nodded slowly. Your after-action reports, your training evaluations, your combat footage from Desert Storm, all digitized and fed into Atlas. So I'm competing against myself. Callahan's voice was flat, in a manner of speaking. Davidson rose from his seat. But an algorithm can't replicate everything that makes you who you are, Jack. Your intuition, your adaptability, your will to win against all odds. That's what I'm counting on. After Davidson left, Callahan sat alone in the silent simulator, contemplating this new information. He was literally facing his own ghost, digitized and enhanced. The irony wasn't lost on him. As cancer slowly erased his physical existence, a digital version of his military expertise would live on, possibly for decades. He was still sitting there when Thompson found him an hour later. Captain, are you all right? Concern etched her features. Fine. Callahan roused himself from his thoughts. Just reviewing our performance. Thompson sat in the gunner's seat. I know what you're thinking. We're not good enough yet. You will be, Callahan assured her. But we have limited time. I need to understand what drives each of you. What brought you to this project? Thompson was quiet for a moment before responding. My father was a tanker, served with the 1st Infantry Division in Desert Storm. He used to tell me stories about the Abrams, how it was the best tank ever built, how it kept him safe. A sad smile crossed her face. He died 3 years ago. Cancer, like you. Callahan looked up sharply. Hayes told you? No. Thompson shook her head. I recognized the signs. My father had the same look toward the end. The careful movements, the occasional grimace when you think no one's watching. Does Rodriguez know, Wilson? No, just me. And I won't tell them unless you want me to. Thompson's gaze was steady. But I understand now why this matters so much to you. One last mission. Callahan nodded, grateful for her perception and discretion. What about Rodriguez? What's his story? Military family, 3rd generation, West Point graduate. He was on track for a promising Army career until he publicly questioned the effectiveness of autonomous weapon systems. Said they would never replace human judgment in complex battlefield situations. The brass didn't appreciate being contradicted by a junior officer. His career stalled. And now he's working on an autonomous tank system? Thompson smiled. He still believes humans should remain in the loop. That's why he joined Davidson's project instead of Raytheon's fully autonomous approach. And Wilson? Genius-level IQ, socially awkward. Never served in the military, but has a deep fascination with military technology. Davidson recruited him directly from MIT. Callahan absorbed this information, already formulating how to mold these individuals into a cohesive crew. Thank you, Thompson. This helps. Sarah, she corrected. If we're going to be a crew, you should use my first name. Callahan smiled. Sarah then, but I'm still captain or sir during operations. Yes, sir. She stood to leave, then hesitated. Captain, whatever happens with this project, it's an honor to serve with you. My father would have been thrilled to know I got to work with the legendary Thunderbolt. After she left, Callahan made his way to his quarters. The pain was returning as the medication wore off. He took another pill, knowing he was using them faster than prescribed. At this rate, he might run out before the competition. But that was a problem for another day. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what Davidson had revealed. Atlas had been programmed with his tactical knowledge, his experiences. But there was one experience it couldn't have, one that wasn't in any report or training evaluation, one that had shaped his approach to tank warfare more than any other. The night before the Battle of Norfolk, when his tank had become separated from the company during a sandstorm, when he had encountered an Iraqi T-72 at point-blank range and survived only because he had violated standard doctrine and kept his engine off to listen for enemy movement. No report mentioned that. No training evaluation captured the pure instinct that had saved his life and the lives of his crew. Perhaps that was the key. The experiences that never made it into official records. The instinctive decisions that couldn't be quantified or programmed. With that thought, Callahan drifted into a fitful sleep, dreaming of desert sands and the thunder of tank guns echoing across the empty landscape. The next morning began with a physical training session. Despite his illness, Callahan insisted on participating, though he moderated his effort to avoid exhaustion. Rodriguez set the pace, his military background evident in his disciplined approach to PT. Sarah matched him stride for stride, while Wilson struggled to keep up. After breakfast, they returned to the simulator for more tactical exercises. This time, Davidson added complexity, introducing multiple enemy formations, electronic warfare elements, and challenging terrain. Enemy forces detected at grid 045721, Wilson reported, monitoring the battle network. Appears to be a mechanized infantry company with tank support. Composition, Callahan demanded. 8 BTR-90s and 4 T-90s according to sensor classification. Callahan considered the situation. Driver, move to position Alpha 3. We'll engage from the ridgeline. Gunner, prioritize the T-90s once they come into view. Thompson maneuvered the tank skillfully through the virtual terrain, using dead ground to mask their movement. Position Alpha 3 reached. Hold down as ordered. Battle sight up, Rodriguez reported. I have visual on lead elements. T-90 at 1,800 meters, bearing 045. Fire at will, Callahan ordered. Rodriguez engaged the first target, then quickly shifted to the second. Both virtual tanks erupted in flames on the tactical display. 2 tanks destroyed, Rodriguez reported. The others are deploying smoke. Thermals, Callahan instructed. They can't hide their heat signatures. Rodriguez switched to thermal imaging. Target acquired through smoke, engaging. The simulated battle continued for 20 minutes. By the end, they had destroyed all enemy vehicles while taking only minor damage from artillery fire that fell short of their position. Much better, Davidson commented as the simulation ended. Your coordination is improving, but you're still following standard tactics. Atlas will be programmed to counter those effectively. What would you suggest? Rodriguez asked, a hint of frustration in his voice. Innovation, Callahan answered before Davidson could respond. Unexpected movements. Tactics that break from doctrine. He turned to Davidson. We need to know more about how Atlas operates, its tendencies, its limitations. Davidson nodded. I've arranged for access to some of Raytheon's test data. It's not complete, but it should give you some insight. The next week followed a similar pattern. Mornings devoted to physical training and technical education about the M1A3 systems. Afternoons spent in increasingly complex battle simulations. Evenings reviewing performance and studying what little they knew about Atlas. Callahan pushed the crew hard, but also took time to build camaraderie. Meals were taken together. War stories were shared. Even Wilson, initially withdrawn, began to open up about his fascination with military technology and his desire to create systems that saved lives rather than just taking them. On the 5th day, they transitioned from the simulator to the actual tank. The M1A3 Abrams was a marvel of engineering. While it maintained the iconic profile of its predecessors, subtle differences were apparent to Callahan's experienced eye. The turret was slightly reshaped for better ballistic protection. The commander's independent viewer was more prominent. Additional sensors dotted the hull and turret. Inside, the layout remained familiar enough for muscle memory to take over. But the technology was generations beyond what Callahan had used in Desert Storm. Digital displays replaced analog gauges. The fire control system featured augmented reality overlays that highlighted targets and provided tactical information in real time. "This is incredible," Sarah whispered as she settled into the driver's station. Responsive doesn't begin to describe it. They spent the day familiarizing themselves with the actual controls, running basic maneuvers on a test track adjacent to the underground facility. The M1A3's enhanced power plant gave it acceleration that surprised even Callahan, who had thought nothing could match the original Abrams mobility. By the end of the first week, they were functioning as a true crew. Communications were crisp and efficient. Each member anticipated the other's needs. Response times in simulated engagements had dropped to near professional levels. But as the crew's performance improved, Callahan's health deteriorated. The cancer advanced relentlessly, sapping his strength and increasing his pain. He carefully modulated his medication, taking just enough to function without becoming mentally dulled. He hid his condition from Rodriguez and Wilson, though Sarah's knowing glances told him she understood the toll it was taking. At the beginning of the second week, Davidson arranged for them to travel to the Nevada test range for final preparations. The desert environment would closely mimic the conditions of the upcoming competition. It would also allow for full power operation of the main gun, which couldn't be done in the underground facility. The Nevada desert stretched in all directions, a desolate landscape of sand and scrub, brush that reminded Callahan of Iraq. The test range itself was a vast area dotted with target arrays, mock villages, and varying terrain features designed to challenge armored vehicles. Their first live fire exercise exceeded expectations. Rodriguez proved to be a natural gunner, scoring direct hits on targets at ranges exceeding 3,000 meters, while the tank was moving at speed. Sarah's driving was impeccable, using terrain features instinctively to provide the best firing positions while minimizing exposure. Even Wilson had found his rhythm, managing the battle network and secondary systems with increasing confidence. He had even begun to anticipate needs, such as switching to appropriate ammunition types before Callahan had to order it. On the third day at the test range, Davidson brought news. "Raytheon is conducting Atlas tests on the north section of the range today. I've arranged for observation privileges. This is your chance to see what you're up against." They drove to an observation post overlooking a broad valley. In the distance, an M1A2 Abrams, modified for autonomous operation, moved through a series of engagement scenarios. Even at this distance, the difference was apparent. Atlas moved with mechanical precision. Each target engagement was methodical, perfect, but somehow lacking the fluid grace of a human crewed tank. Callahan watched through high-powered binoculars. "It's fast," he observed. "Target acquisition to firing in under 2 seconds." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Faster than any human gunner could manage consistently." "But predictable," Sarah pointed out. "Watch the movement patterns. It follows optimal paths calculated from terrain analysis. A human might choose a less efficient route for tactical advantage." Wilson studied the technical data they had been provided. Its sensors are impressive: thermal, radar, LiDAR, acoustic. It can detect targets human crews would miss entirely. Callahan lowered the binoculars, his expression thoughtful. "Every system has weaknesses, even one this sophisticated." "What are you thinking, sir?" Rodriguez asked. "I'm thinking about Norfolk," Callahan replied. "About how the unexpected can change everything." They returned to their own training area, Callahan unusually quiet as he contemplated what they had observed. That evening, he called the crew together in their temporary quarters. "We've been approaching this wrong," he began. "We've been trying to outperform Atlas at what it does best: precision, calculation, optimization. We can't win that way." "So what do we do?" Sarah asked. "We embrace chaos." Callahan spread out a map of the competition area. "The test will be a simulated combat scenario. 2 tanks, ours and Atlas, competing to achieve objectives while engaging each other in various targets." "Standard tank gunnery competition," Rodriguez nodded. "Not quite," Callahan tapped the map. "The scenario allows for freedom of movement and tactical choices. That's our advantage. Atlas will choose the mathematically optimal approach. We'll choose the unexpected one. Such as, Wilson looks skeptical, such as using terrain in ways that seem inefficient but provide tactical surprise, such as deliberately exposing ourselves to draw fire under specific conditions, such as creating false signatures to confuse its sensors. Rodriguez leaned forward, intrigued. Unconventional tactics. Exactly. Callahan circled an area on the map. The competition zone includes this sector with abandoned mining structures. Complex terrain, multiple levels. Perfect for breaking line of sight and creating confusion. Atlas will have detailed maps, Wilson pointed out. It will know every inch of that area. Knowing isn't the same as understanding, Callahan countered. An AI analyzes. A human intuits. That's the difference we need to exploit. They spent the remainder of the evening developing unconventional tactics, challenging assumptions, and preparing for the upcoming competition. As midnight approached, Callahan dismissed them to get some rest. Only Sarah remained behind, concern evident in her expression. You should be resting too, she said quietly. You're pushing yourself too hard. Callahan sighed, the weight of his illness suddenly heavy on his shoulders. I'll rest when this is done. And then? And then I'll decide how I want to spend whatever time I have left. He managed a small smile. Don't worry about me, Sarah. I've made peace with what's coming. She placed a hand on his shoulder. My father said something similar near the end, but he also said he was glad to have family with him. Do you have anyone, Captain? Callahan shook his head. My wife died 10 years ago. Breast cancer. We never had children. The Army was my family. Then we're your family now. Sarah's voice was firm. Me, Rodriguez, even Wilson in his awkward way. Whatever happens after this competition, you won't face it alone unless that's truly what you want. Callahan was surprised by the emotion that welled up at her words. After decades of command authority and self-reliance, the simple offer of companionship in his final days touched him deeply. Thank you, he said, finally. That means more than you know. As Sarah left, Callahan returned to the map, studying the competition zone. Tomorrow would be their final full day of training before the event. He needed to ensure every member of his crew was prepared for what they would face. But as he traced potential movement routes with his finger, his mind drifted to what Sarah had said. Family. It had been so long since he had thought of anyone that way. The Army had been his life, his tanks his home. Now, in what little time remained to him, he had found connection again with this unlikely crew. Perhaps that, even more than defeating Atlas, would be his true legacy. The pain woke him before dawn. Sharp, insistent, radiating through his abdomen like fire. Callahan fumbled for his medication in the darkness, swallowing 2 pills dry. More than the prescribed dose, but necessary if he was to function today. He dressed carefully, moving with deliberate slowness until the medication began to take effect. By the time he joined the others for breakfast, his expression betrayed nothing of the battle raging inside his body. Final training day, he announced as they ate. We'll run through the complete competition scenario once, then focus on specific tactical elements that need refinement. Questions? Sir, Rodriguez began, I've been reviewing the competition rules. There's something interesting. While direct fire on the opposing tank is permitted, the competition is scored primarily on objective completion and target engagement. We could theoretically win without ever directly engaging Atlas. Callahan nodded. Good observation. Keep that in mind as an option. The goal isn't to destroy Atlas, it's to outperform it. They spent the morning running a full simulation of the competition. Their performance was solid, but Callahan identified several areas for improvement. Rodriguez's target acquisition needed to be more fluid when dealing with multiple contacts. Sarah's terrain usage, while excellent, sometimes prioritized protection over mobility when speed was the better choice. Wilson needed to provide information more proactively rather than waiting to be asked. The afternoon was devoted to live fire exercises, focusing on engaging targets while on the move. The M1A3's fire control system was remarkable, allowing for accurate shots even at high speed over rough terrain. By evening, Callahan was satisfied they had reached peak readiness. As they secured the tank for the night, Davidson arrived with a visitor, a tall, distinguished man in an expensive suit who carried himself with military bearing. Jack, Davidson called, there's someone I want you to meet. Raymond Walsh, CEO of Raytheon Davis Technologies. Walsh extended his hand, his grip firm. Captain Callahan, your reputation precedes you. Callahan studied the man who had developed Atlas, the system they would face tomorrow. "Mr. Walsh, I've heard a lot about your work." "As I have about yours." Walsh smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "William tells me you're commanding his tank for tomorrow's competition. Bold choice, bringing a legend out of retirement." "Sometimes old solutions are the best ones," Callahan replied evenly. "Perhaps." Walsh glanced at the M1A3. "But the future belongs to systems that don't bleed, don't tire, and don't make emotional decisions. Atlas represents the inevitable evolution of warfare." "We'll see tomorrow, won't we?" Walsh nodded. "Indeed we will. May the best system win." With a final nod to Davidson, he departed. "Charming fellow," Sarah commented dryly once Walsh was out of earshot. Davidson sighed. "Raymond and I have history. We were both colonels competing for the same star. He retired instead of accepting a lateral move, started Raytheon Davis with family money and government connections. And now you're competing again," Rodriguez observed, "with much higher stakes." Davidson turned to Callahan. "The Pentagon evaluation team arrives at 0800 tomorrow. The competition begins at 1000. Get some rest. Tomorrow will determine the future of American armored warfare." That night, Callahan lay awake, the pain keeping him conscious despite the medication. He thought about Walsh's words. Systems that don't bleed, don't tire, don't make emotional decisions. Was that truly the future? Machines fighting machines with humans merely observers? He thought of the young soldiers he had commanded over the decades. Their courage, their sacrifice, their humanity in the face of war's inhumanity. Could an algorithm ever capture that spirit? Could a machine ever understand what it meant to fight not just for victory, but for the person beside you? These questions followed him into uneasy dreams of metal behemoths battling across endless deserts, their human creators watching from a distance as the machines they had built determined the fate of nations. Morning arrived with clear skies and rising temperatures. Perfect conditions for the competition. Callahan took his medication, grimacing at how few pills remained. Enough for today. Tomorrow's problems could wait for tomorrow. The Pentagon evaluation team consisted of 5 officers ranging from major to brigadier general. They listened attentively as Davidson and Walsh presented their respective systems, explaining the philosophies behind their approaches to autonomous armored warfare. The M1A3 with human crew augmented by AI assistance represents an evolutionary approach, Davidson explained. It preserves the human judgment and adaptability that has always been the strength of our armored forces while enhancing performance through technology. Atlas represents a revolutionary approach, Walsh countered. Full autonomy guided by algorithms developed from the collective experience of our best tank commanders. Faster reaction times, no risk to human operators, the ability to operate in environments lethal to human crews. The brigadier general heading the evaluation team, a woman named Garcia with a background in both engineering and combat command, asked pointed questions about both systems. The key question is not just performance, she noted, but reliability, adaptability to unexpected situations, in alignment with our strategic doctrine. At 0945, the crews moved to their vehicles. Callahan led his team through a final inspection of the M1A3, checking systems and ensuring all was ready. Across the staging area, technicians made final adjustments to Atlas, the autonomous M1A2 that would be their opponent. "Remember the plan," Callahan told his crew as they took their positions. "We don't try to outperform Atlas at its strengths. We force it to deal with our strengths." "Yes, sir," they responded in unison. The radio crackled. "All units, competition begins in 5 minutes. Proceed to your starting positions." Sarah guided the tank smoothly to the designated starting point, a shallow depression at the southern edge of the competition zone. Through his viewer, Callahan could see Atlas taking position at the northern edge, its turret moving in mechanical precision as its systems conducted final checks. "This is control," came the announcement. "Competition will commence on my mark. Your objectives are as follows. Engage and neutralize all designated targets within the competition zone. Capture and hold the central observation post for a minimum of 5 minutes. Prevent your opponent from achieving these same objectives. Scoring is based on objectives completed, targets neutralized, time elapsed, and damage sustained. You may engage your opponent directly, but destruction is not required for victory." Callahan checked his crew one last time. Sarah sat ready at the driver's station, hands on the controls. Rodriguez was at the gunner's position, his eye to the sight. Wilson monitored the battle network displays, information from multiple sensors flowing across his screens. 3, 2, 1, mark. Competition is now active. The M1A3 surged forward as Sarah applied power, the 1,500 horsepower turbine engine roaring to life. They moved quickly out of the depression, accelerating toward the first waypoint in their plan. Atlas is moving directly toward the observation post, Wilson reported, monitoring the battle network. Standard approach along the main valley. Callahan nodded. As expected, driver, proceed to position Bravo. Gunner, prepare for long-range engagement of targets in Sector 3. Yes, sir, Sarah and Rodriguez responded in unison. The tank crested a ridge, giving them a commanding view of the eastern portion of the competition zone. Rodriguez immediately began engaging targets, the main gun booming as 120mm rounds found their marks with devastating accuracy. 3 targets destroyed, he reported. Moving to next target group. They continued their advance, systematically clearing assigned sectors while avoiding direct confrontation with Atlas. The autonomous tank was following a predictable pattern, moving efficiently from one objective to the next, its target acquisition and engagement flawless. Atlas has reached the observation post, Wilson announced, beginning its holding pattern. Callahan studied the tactical display. Now we implement Phase 2. Driver, proceed to the mining complex. Use the covered approach we discussed. Sarah guided the tank through a narrow ravine, using the terrain to mask their movement from Atlas's sensors. The abandoned mining complex loomed ahead, a maze of structures and excavations that would provide both cover and tactical options. Atlas will have to come to us, Callahan explained as they entered the complex. And when it does, it will be forced to operate in an environment that negates many of its advantages. They positioned the tank inside a partially collapsed processing building, the massive structure providing excellent cover while allowing them to observe the approaches. Rodriguez oriented the main gun toward the most likely avenue of approach, while Wilson monitored sensors for any sign of Atlas. 2 minutes until Atlas completes its hold requirement at the observation post, Wilson reported. Based on its pattern, it will then proceed to clear the western sectors. Callahan nodded, which will bring it right to us. Perfect. The minutes ticked by. Tension built inside the tank as they waited for their opponent to appear. Finally, Wilson's sensors detected movement. Contact. Atlas is approaching from the northwest. Currently 1,500 meters in closing. Hold position, Callahan ordered. Let it come to us. Through his thermal viewer, Callahan watched as Atlas approached the mining complex. Its movements were precise, methodical. It paused at regular intervals to scan its surroundings, its sensors sweeping across the structures. It's searching for targets, Rodriguez observed, including us. And having difficulty in this cluttered environment, Callahan added with satisfaction. Prepare for Phase 3. Driver, on my command, you'll execute the breakthrough maneuver we practiced. Gunner, be ready to engage Atlas's rear armor as we pass. Yes, sir, they acknowledged. Atlas continued its approach, now just 800 meters from their position. It stopped at the entrance to the complex, seemingly hesitant to enter the confined space. It's calculating risk, Wilson explained, monitoring the battle network. This environment presents too many variables for its programming to process efficiently. Now, Callahan ordered, execute breakthrough. Sarah gunned the engine, the M1A3 bursting from its hiding place with startling speed. The sudden movement caught Atlas by surprise, its turret rotating too slowly to track them as they raced past, barely 50 meters from the autonomous tank. Rodriguez fired as they passed, the main gun striking Atlas's rear armor. In a real engagement, it would have been a killing blow. In the competition, it registered as significant damage. Hit confirmed, Rodriguez reported. Rear armor penetrated. Now to the observation post, Callahan directed. Maximum speed. We need to establish position before Atlas can recover and respond. Sarah pushed the tank to its limits, the engine howling as they raced across the open ground toward the central observation post. Behind them, Atlas had recovered from the surprise attack and was in pursuit, but the damage to its systems had slowed its response time. They reached the observation post with Atlas still 1,000 meters behind. Sarah positioned the tank in a hold-down position, with only the turret exposed above the ridgeline. Rodriguez oriented the main gun toward their pursuer. One target remaining in our assigned sectors, Wilson reported. Bearing 045, range 2,700 meters. Engage, Callahan ordered, then returned to covering Atlas. Rodriguez swiftly acquired and destroyed the final target, then reoriented toward Atlas, which had stopped its approach and appeared to be reassessing the situation. It's calculating again, Wilson observed. trying to find an optimal approach that minimizes its exposure. Which buys us time on the clock for holding this position, Callahan noted. Exactly as planned. The minutes ticked by. Atlas made several probing movements, testing their responses, but never committed to a direct assault on their position. Finally, the radio crackled. Competition complete. All units, stand down and return to the staging area. Callahan exhaled slowly, tension draining from his body. They had executed their plan nearly flawlessly. Whether it would be enough to outperform Atlas remained to be seen. As they drove back to the staging area, Sarah glanced over her shoulder at Callahan. "How do you think we did, sir?" "We did what we set out to do," he replied. "We forced Atlas to operate outside its comfort zone. We used tactics it wasn't programmed to anticipate. Whether that's enough for the evaluation team to see the value of keeping humans in the loop, we'll find out soon enough." At the staging area, the evaluation team was reviewing data from both vehicles, analyzing performance metrics and tactical decisions. Davidson stood with them, occasionally pointing to displays and offering explanations. Walsh stood apart, his expression unreadable as technicians examined Atlas. Callahan and his crew disembarked, the afternoon heat washing over them as they left the climate-controlled interior of the tank. Despite the medication, pain radiated through Callahan's body, intensified by the exertion and stress of the competition. He stood straight through sheer force of will, determined not to show weakness. Brigadier General Garcia approached them, accompanied by Davidson. "Impressive performance, Captain Callahan," she said. "Your unconventional tactics definitely caught Atlas by surprise." "Thank you, General," Callahan responded. "That was our intent. We'll be reviewing all the data before making our final assessment," she continued. "But I wanted to personally thank you for participating. Your experience and perspective are valuable contributions to this evaluation." After Garcia departed, Davidson turned to Callahan, a cautious smile on his face. "The initial feedback is positive. They were particularly impressed by your use of the mining complex to neutralize Atlas's sensor advantages." "The final decision?" Callahan asked. "They'll announce it tomorrow morning." Davidson checked his watch. "You should all get some rest. It's been a long day." As the others headed toward their quarters, Callahan remained by the tank, one hand resting on its hull. The metal was still warm from the desert sun and the heat of the engine. He had always found a certain comfort in that warmth, a reminder of the living machine that had carried him through so many battles. "One last ride," he murmured to the tank. "Thank you for that." The pain surged suddenly, stealing his breath. He leaned against the tank for support, waiting for it to subside. When it finally eased, he straightened and turned to find Sarah watching him from a few meters away. "I thought you'd gone with the others," he said. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." She approached, concern evident in her expression. "The medication isn't working as well anymore, is it?" Callahan shook his head. "The doctors warned me this would happen. The body builds tolerance over time." "Do you have enough for tomorrow?" "Just barely," he managed to smile. "Don't worry about me, Sarah. I've endured worse." She nodded, though her expression remained troubled. "Rodriguez suggested we have dinner together tonight, to celebrate regardless of the outcome. Would you join us?" For a moment, Callahan was tempted to decline, to retreat to his quarters and face his pain in private. But Sarah's words from the previous night echoed in his mind. Family. Perhaps that was what he needed now, more than solitude. "I'd be honored," he said. Dinner was a surprisingly jovial affair. Rodriguez had somehow procured steaks and beer, luxuries not typically available at the test range. Wilson, usually reserved, revealed a talent for mimicry, entertaining them with impressions of Davidson and Walsh. Sarah shared stories of her father's tank exploits, some of which Callahan suspected were embellished but appreciated nonetheless. For his part, Callahan found himself recounting tales from his early days as a tank commander, the mishaps and triumphs that had shaped his career. The comrades he had served with, some lost in combat, others simply lost to time. It felt good to speak of them, to ensure they were remembered. As the evening wound down, Rodriguez raised his beer in a toast. "To the best tank commander I've ever served under," he said, "and to whatever tomorrow brings." "Hear, hear," Sarah and Wilson echoed. Callahan nodded his thanks, unexpectedly moved by their gesture. "It has been my privilege to serve with you," he said. "Whatever happens tomorrow, remember this. It's not the machine that matters. It's the people who operate it, their courage, their judgment, their humanity. That's what makes the difference in battle and in life." They parted ways for the night, each lost in thoughts of what the morning might bring. Callahan returned to his quarters, took his second-to-last pain pill, and prepared for what he suspected would be a restless night. Before sleep claimed him, he found himself thinking not of tanks or battles or the cancer slowly killing him, but of the three young people with whom he had shared the evening. In them, perhaps, was his true legacy. Not the battles won or medals earned, but the knowledge and values passed to the next generation of warriors. With that comforting thought, he drifted into a dreamless sleep, the pain temporarily held at bay by medication and the unexpected peace that had settled over him. Morning arrived with the harsh clarity of the desert sun. Callahan woke before dawn, his body protesting each movement. The pain had settled deep into his bones overnight, a constant companion that no amount of willpower could fully banish. He reached for his last pain pill, hesitating briefly before swallowing it dry. One final dose to get him through what might be the most important day of his career. The cool morning air carried the scent of sage and dust as Callahan made his way to the command center, where the evaluation team would announce their decision. Sarah, Rodriguez, and Wilson were already waiting, their expressions a mixture of anticipation and concern. "Captain," Sarah greeted him, her eyes quickly assessing his condition. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Ready," Callahan replied simply, offering no elaboration on the pain that radiated through his abdomen with each breath. Brigadier General Garcia arrived with her evaluation team precisely at Burrow 800. The small gathering fell silent as she took position at the front of the room. Davidson and Walsh stood on the opposite sides, their postures reflecting the tension between them. After reviewing yesterday's competition results and all relevant data, Garcia began, her voice crisp and authoritative, "We've reached a preliminary assessment. Both systems demonstrated impressive capabilities. Atlas showed superior target acquisition speed and engagement accuracy. The M1A3 with human crew demonstrated exceptional tactical adaptation in battlefield awareness." She paused, looking directly at Callahan and his crew, then at the Raytheon team. "This presents us with a dilemma. The quantitative metrics favor Atlas. Reaction times, precision, ammunition efficiency all exceeded human performance. However, the qualitative elements favor the human-crewed M1A3. The ability to adapt to complex terrain, to implement unexpected tactics, to make intuitive decisions that defied conventional doctrine." Walsh stepped forward. "General, with respect, the purpose of this evaluation was to determine the superior system based on objective criteria. By those standards, Atlas clearly demonstrated superior performance." "In a controlled environment, yes," Garcia acknowledged. "But warfare is rarely controlled, Mr. Walsh. The question before us is not just which system performs better under ideal conditions, but which system better serves our national defense needs across the full spectrum of combat operations." Davidson remained silent, though Callahan could see the tension in his posture. "Our recommendation to the Pentagon will be for further testing," Garcia announced. "A more comprehensive evaluation that places both systems in scenarios of increasing complexity and uncertainty." "What kind of scenarios?" Davidson asked. "Urban combat, electronic warfare environments, degraded sensor conditions, situations where adaptability and judgment are as important as speed and precision." Garcia turned to face both teams. "This competition is not over. It's just beginning." Walsh's expression darkened. "General, we designed Atlas to excel in exactly those conditions. Its learning algorithms allow it to adapt to new situations faster than any human crew." "Then you should welcome the opportunity to prove that, Mr. Walsh." Garcia's tone made it clear the decision was final. "We'll reconvene in 1 week at the Fort Irwin National Training Center. The urban combat facility there will provide the environment for our next evaluation." As the meeting dispersed, Davidson approached Callahan and his crew. "This is good news," he said quietly. "Urban combat will highlight the advantages of human decision-making. It also gives Walsh a week to reprogram Atlas to address the weaknesses we expose," Callahan pointed out. Davidson nodded grimly. "True, which means we need to find new ways to challenge it." He glanced at Callahan with concern. "Are you up for this, Jack? Another week?" The question hung in the air. Callahan was acutely aware of his condition. The cancer wouldn't wait. The pain would only worsen. Yet the prospect of backing down now, of leaving the fight unfinished, was unthinkable. "I'll need more medication," he said finally. "But yes, I'm in." "I'll arrange it," Davidson promised. "We'll fly back to our facility today for preliminary training, then head to Fort Irwin on Monday." As Davidson walked away, Sarah stepped closer to Callahan. "Sir," she said quietly, "I know what this is costing you. If you need to step back, That's not an option, Thompson. Callahan cut her off, his tone firm but not unkind. We started this together. We'll finish it together. Rodriguez and Wilson nodded in agreement, a silent pact forming between the four of them. They would see this through, whatever the cost. The flight back to Davidson's facility passed in thoughtful silence. Each member of the crew was processing the implications of the evaluation team's decision. Extended testing meant extended pressure, but also opportunity. Opportunity to prove definitively that humans still belonged in the loop. Upon arrival, Davidson gathered them in the tactical planning room. Garcia's decision changes our timeline, but not our objective, and he began. We need to prepare for urban combat scenarios, which present different challenges than open desert warfare. Close quarters, Rodriguez observed. Limited sight lines, multiple levels of engagement. Exactly, Davidson nodded. And crucially, civilian presence. Even in simulated urban combat, the evaluation will include non-combatant elements that must be protected. Callahan leaned forward, his tactical mind already working through the implications. That's our advantage. Discriminating between combatants and civilians requires judgment that algorithms struggle with. Unless they've been specifically trained on that data, Wilson pointed out, which I guarantee Walsh is doing right now. There's another factor, Sarah added. In urban environments, communication is often degraded. Buildings block signals. Electronic warfare compounds the problem. An autonomous system might be isolated from its command network. Davidson smiled. All excellent observations. Here's my proposal. We spend the next 5 days in intensive urban combat training. 2 days in the simulator, then 3 days of live exercises in our urban training facility. We focus on the scenarios most likely to challenge Atlas's decision-making capabilities. What about the crew? Callahan asked. Atlas doesn't fatigue, we do. We'll rotate training sessions, Davidson decided. 6 hours on, 6 hours off. Enough intensity to build proficiency, enough rest to maintain performance. And your medication, Captain? Sarah asked quietly. Davidson reached into his pocket and produced a prescription bottle. As promised, this should last the week. The dosage is stronger than your previous medication. Use it carefully. Callahan took the bottle, noting the serious expression on Davidson's face. They both knew what was at stake. Callahan's health was deteriorating faster than anticipated. The stronger medication might help him function through the next evaluation, but at a cost. Increased side effects, potential mental fogging, a delicate balance between pain management and cognitive clarity. Thank you, Callahan said simply, pocketing the pills. Now let's get to work. The next morning began with simulator training. The urban combat scenarios were dramatically different from the open desert environment of their previous training. Multi-story buildings created complex engagement geometries. Simulated civilians moved unpredictably through the battle space, requiring split-second discrimination between threat and non-threat. Contact, technical vehicle with mounted weapon. 2 o'clock, 200 meters, Rodriguez called out, acquiring a target in the simulated city street. Identified, Callahan confirmed. Fire when ready. Rodriguez engaged, the simulated main gun destroying the target vehicle. Before they could celebrate the hit, Wilson reported from the battle network. Civilian vehicles entering the area from the north, mixed with potential hostile technicals. Thompson, position us at the next intersection, Callahan ordered. We need better visibility of the approach. Sarah guided the tank skillfully through the narrow streets, finding an optimal position that offered both cover and observation angles. Rodriguez swiveled the turret to cover the approaching vehicles, while Wilson monitored multiple sensor feeds to help discriminate between threats and civilians. Lead vehicle appears to be civilian, Wilson reported. Second vehicle has thermal signature consistent with mounted weapons. Confirmed, Rodriguez said, focusing his sights on the second vehicle. Armed technical, request permission to engage. Negative, Callahan countermanded. Civilian vehicle too close for main gun. Use cokes. Rodriguez switched to the coaxial machine gun, delivering a precise burst that disabled the technical without endangering the civilian vehicle ahead of it. The simulator registered a successful engagement with minimal collateral damage. Excellent decision, Captain. Davidson's voice came through the intercom. That's exactly the kind of judgment call that Atlas might struggle with. The training continued for hours, scenario after scenario, testing their ability to make complex decisions under pressure. By the end of the day, Callahan could feel the strain in every member of his crew. The urban environment demanded constant vigilance, rapid decisions, and precise execution. As they exited the simulator, Davidson met them with a tablet displaying their performance metrics. You're doing well, but there's room for improvement. Rodriguez, your target discrimination time needs to decrease by at least 1 second. Thompson, your navigation through debris-filled streets needs work. Wilson, you're still not anticipating information needs consistently. The criticism was fair but demanding. Callahan could see the fatigue in his crew's faces. We'll improve, he promised, but my crew needs rest now. We'll hit it fresh tomorrow. Davidson nodded. 0700 tomorrow. We'll focus on multi-level engagements, opponents above and below your position. As the others departed for their quarters, Callahan remained behind, studying the performance data. Despite the pain that had built throughout the day, he forced himself to concentrate on the metrics, looking for patterns and opportunities for improvement. You should rest too, Davidson said, returning to find Callahan still reviewing the data an hour later. Soon, Callahan promised absently, not looking up from the tablet. Davidson sat beside him. Jack, I know what you're doing, pushing yourself to the limit, refusing to acknowledge your condition, but you can't will away cancer. Callahan finally looked up, his expression hardening. I'm not trying to will it away, William. I'm trying to outrun it, just long enough to finish this mission. And if you push too hard, if you collapse during the evaluation, then you'll have to find another tank commander, Callahan said bluntly. But that won't happen. I've never failed to complete a mission, and I don't intend to start now. Davidson sighed, recognizing the immovable determination that had made Callahan legendary among tank commanders. At least take your medication. You're no good to your crew if you're incapacitated by pain. Callahan nodded, reaching for the bottle in his pocket. The new pills were larger than his previous medication, the dosage stronger. He swallowed one with water from his canteen, knowing it would take effect soon. I'll see you in the morning, he said, rising from his seat with the careful movements of a man in constant pain. Davidson watched him go, concern evident in his expression. He had known Callahan for 30 years, had seen him face down enemy tanks without flinching. But this enemy was different, insidious, unrelenting, and for the first time, Davidson wondered if he had asked too much of his old friend. The medication took effect as Callahan reached his quarters. The relief was immediate and profound, the pain receding to a distant awareness rather than an overwhelming presence. But there were other effects too, a slight disconnection from reality, thoughts that seemed to float rather than follow their usual disciplined patterns. He would need to be careful with the dosage during actual operations. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling as the medication carried him into a state between wakefulness and sleep. Images from past battles mingled with today's training scenarios. The desert of Iraq blended with the simulated urban landscape. Enemy T-72s transformed into civilian vehicles that had to be protected rather than destroyed. In this twilight state, a new tactical approach began to form in his mind. Not a direct confrontation with Atlas, but something more subtle. A scenario that would force the AI to make the kind of nuanced ethical decisions that defined human combat leadership. The kind of decisions that couldn't be reduced to algorithms and probability calculations. The thought accompanied him into sleep, where it continued to develop in dreams of cities under siege and impossible choices presented in the heat of battle. Morning brought improved focus despite a night of fragmented sleep. Callahan joined his crew for breakfast, noting with approval their rested appearance. The rotation schedule Davidson had implemented was working. Today, we focus on multi-level engagements, Callahan reminded them as they ate. Urban combat isn't just about what's in front of you. It's above you, below you, behind you. Threats can come from any direction. The M1A3 has enhanced sensors for exactly that purpose, Wilson pointed out. Better situational awareness than any previous tank model. Technology helps, Callahan acknowledged, but it's still our judgment that matters most. A sensor can tell you something's there. Only a human can decide what it means and what to do about it. They entered the simulator, determined to improve on yesterday's performance. The scenarios Davidson had prepared were increasingly complex. Buildings with multiple floors, underground passages, aerial threats from drones and helicopters, each requiring rapid assessment and decisive action. Hostile drone, 11 o'clock high, Wilson called out, the battle network highlighting the threat on their displays. Identified, Rodriguez confirmed, swiveling the turret to bring the tank's anti-aircraft capability to bear. Engaging with secondary armament, the simulated 12.7mm machine gun shattered, tracking the drone until it exploded in a satisfying fireball. Ground force emerging from subway entrance, 9 o'clock, 150 meters, Wilson continued. classified as hostile infantry with anti-tank weapons. Thompson, repositioned to bring main gun to bear, Callahan ordered. Sarah expertly maneuvered the tank to a position that allowed Rodriguez to engage the infantry while maintaining awareness of other potential threat axes. The coordination between crew members was smoother today, their responses more intuitive. Much better, Davidson commented after 4 hours of continuous scenarios. Your reaction times are improving across the board. Target discrimination is approaching optimal levels. What about Atlas? Callahan asked during a brief break. Any intelligence on how Walsh is adapting his system? Davidson shook his head. Nothing concrete, but my sources say they've been running urban combat simulations nonstop since the evaluation announcement. They're trying to program Atlas to handle exactly the kind of scenarios we're training for. Can they succeed? Sarah asked. Can algorithms really replicate human judgment in these complex environments? To a degree, Wilson answered before Davidson could respond. Machine learning can analyze thousands of past decisions and extract patterns. Atlas can be programmed to recognize situations similar to those in its database and apply the solutions that worked previously. But what about situations it's never seen before, Rodriguez pressed? Novel scenarios with no clear precedent? That's where we maintain our advantage, Callahan said firmly. Genuine innovation, true adaptability, the ability to make moral judgments that transcend tactical considerations. They returned to training with renewed purpose, pushing themselves through increasingly difficult scenarios. By the end of the day, their performance metrics showed significant improvement. Response times had decreased. Target discrimination accuracy had increased. Coordination between crew members had become almost instinctive. As they exited the simulator, Davidson presented them with a surprising announcement. Tomorrow we move to live exercises ahead of schedule. Your performance in the simulator has exceeded expectations. The actual M1A3? Sarah asked, unable to hide her enthusiasm. Yes, Davidson confirmed. With live ammunition on our urban training range, it's time to translate your simulator performance to the real thing. The news energized the crew despite their fatigue. Simulator training was valuable, but nothing compared to the experience of operating the actual vehicle in realistic conditions. For Callahan, it represented another step toward their ultimate goal, proving definitively that human crews still belonged in tanks. That evening, as Callahan was reviewing the day's performance data in his quarters, a knock came at his door. He opened it to find Rodriguez standing in the hallway, his expression troubled. Captain, Rodriguez began, may I speak with you? Callahan stepped aside, allowing the younger man to enter. What's on your mind, Lieutenant? Rodriguez hesitated before responding. I've been analyzing our performance data alongside what we know about Atlas. I'm concerned that we might be approaching this all wrong. Explain, Callahan said, genuinely curious. We're trying to prove that humans make better decisions than AI in complex environments. But what if that's not enough? What if Atlas performs adequately in those environments, even if not optimally? The Pentagon might still choose it simply because it doesn't risk human lives. Callahan considered this perspective carefully. It was a valid concern, one that he had contemplated himself. You're suggesting we need more than just better performance. We need to demonstrate something Atlas fundamentally cannot do. Exactly, Rodriguez nodded. Something that goes beyond tactical decision-making to the core of what makes human judgment valuable in warfare. Moral judgment, Callahan said softly. The ability to weigh values that cannot be quantified. To make decisions based on principles rather than just probabilities. Yes, sir. Rodriguez's expression showed relief that Callahan understood. I believe we need to force Atlas into a situation where the right decision cannot be calculated, only felt. Callahan moved to his desk and activated a secure tablet. I've been thinking along similar lines. Last night, I started developing a scenario that might accomplish exactly what you are suggesting. He showed Rodriguez the tactical plan he had been formulating. A complex urban scenario involving civilians at risk, multiple threat vectors, and ethical dilemmas that would force difficult choices with no clearly optimal solution. Rodriguez studied the plan, his expression growing more animated as he grasped its implications. This is brilliant, Captain, but will the evaluation team allow such a scenario? They might not, Callahan admitted, which is why we need to be prepared to create it ourselves if necessary, within the parameters of whatever test they design. You mean manipulate the evaluation? Rodriguez looked uncertain. I mean ensure the evaluation tests what truly matters, Callahan corrected. The Pentagon needs to understand what they're potentially losing by removing humans from tanks. It's our responsibility to show them. Rodriguez nodded slowly, coming to terms with what Callahan was proposing. I understand, sir, and I'm with you. After Rodriguez departed, Callahan returned to his tactical plan, refining details and considering contingencies. The pain was returning as his medication wore off, but he pushed through it, driven by the conviction that this might be his final and most important contribution to the future of armored warfare. When he finally took another pill and lay down to rest, it was with the knowledge that tomorrow would bring them one step closer to the ultimate test. Live exercises in the M1A3, the closest approximation to actual combat that training could provide. Morning arrived with a sense of anticipation that energized the entire crew. After a brief breakfast, they gathered at the vehicle bay where the M1A3 Abrams waited. In the bright lights of the facility, its advanced design features were even more apparent than during their previous encounters. The sleeker turret profile, the additional sensor arrays, the modified exhaust system that reduced its thermal signature. She's been prepared for urban operations, Davidson explained as they approached. Additional side armor to protect against RPGs. Enhanced anti-drone capabilities. Improved close-quarters situational awareness systems. They conducted a thorough pre-operation inspection, each crew member checking their station and systems. The familiarity they had developed in the simulator translated well to the actual vehicle, their movements confident and practiced. Callahan settled into the commander's position, the seat adjusting automatically to his physical dimensions. The displays came alive around him, presenting a wealth of tactical information. Through his independent viewer, he could observe the vehicle bay in stunning clarity, thermal overlays highlighting temperature differences that would be crucial in combat situations. All stations, report readiness, he ordered, falling naturally into the command role he had occupied for decades. Driver ready, Sarah responded. Gunner ready from Rodriguez. Systems operator ready, Wilson completed the check. Vehicle is fully operational and combat ready, Davidson confirmed from his monitoring station. You are cleared to proceed to the urban training facility. Sarah guided the tank smoothly out of the vehicle bay and onto the transport road that led to the training area. The M1A3's advanced suspension made the ride noticeably smoother than the older models Callahan had commanded, reducing crew fatigue and improving weapon stability. The urban training facility came into view as they crested a small rise. Unlike many such facilities, which consisted of simple concrete structures arranged in a grid, Davidson's company had constructed a realistic urban environment. Multi-story buildings with internal rooms and corridors, underground passages, variety in street width and configuration. It even included simulated civilian infrastructure such as power lines and water systems that could complicate combat operations. Impressive, Callahan commented as they approached. We've spared no expense, Davidson replied over the radio. The scenario today involves clearing a hostile force from the central district while minimizing collateral damage to civilian structures. Remote-controlled target vehicles and infantry drones will simulate enemy forces. Live ammunition is authorized, but exercise appropriate fire discipline. They entered the mock city cautiously, Sarah maintaining a steady pace while Rodriguez scanned for targets and Wilson monitored the battle network for threat indicators. Callahan coordinated their efforts, his experienced eye constantly evaluating their tactical position and potential danger areas. The first engagement came suddenly. A remote-controlled vehicle resembling a technical with a mounted machine gun emerged from a side street 300 meters ahead. Target technical, 12 o'clock, 300 meters, Rodriguez reported crisply. Identified, Callahan confirmed. Cokes only, minimize collateral damage. Rodriguez engaged with the coaxial machine gun, placing a precise burst that disabled the target vehicle without causing excessive destruction. The remote operators signaled a successful kill, and the vehicle powered down. Good shot, Callahan approved. Thompson, advance to the next intersection. Wilson, any activity on the battle network? Multiple heat signatures detected in the building to our right, Wilson reported. Classification uncertain. Could be civilians or combatants. This was exactly the kind of ambiguity that urban combat presented. Heat signatures alone couldn't distinguish between a family sheltering in place and insurgents preparing an ambush. Callahan studied the building through his thermal viewer, noting details that the automated systems might miss. The positioning of the signatures, their movement patterns, subtle indicators that human experience could interpret, but algorithms might not recognize. Those are combatants, he determined. The spacing is too regular for civilians. They're maintaining fields of fire. Rodriguez, prepare for precision engagement through the second-floor windows. He round, time delay fuse. Target acquired, Rodriguez confirmed. He loaded, time delay set. Fire. The main gun roared. The 100 mpm high explosive round traveling true to its target. It penetrated the building's window before detonating inside. The time delay fuse ensuring maximum effect on the occupants while minimizing structural damage. The heat signatures inside disappeared from the thermal display. Targets neutralized, Wilson confirmed. No collateral damage to adjacent structures. They proceeded methodically through the training city, engaging targets with precision and discipline. Each encounter presented unique challenges, discriminating between hostile and neutral entities, selecting appropriate weapons for each engagement, balancing the need for force protection with minimizing collateral damage. By midday, they had cleared two-thirds of the designated area, their performance metrics exceeding even their simulator results. The live environment seemed to sharpen their focus and improve their coordination beyond what virtual training could achieve. "You're doing exceptionally well," Davidson commended during a brief halt for systems check and crew rest. "Especially impressive is your target discrimination and weapon selection. You're consistently choosing the right tool for each engagement." "The crew is functioning as a unit now," Callahan observed with satisfaction, anticipating each other's needs and actions. Davidson nodded agreement. "This afternoon we'll introduce additional complexity, air threats, electronic warfare effects, degraded communications, the kind of challenges you're likely to face at Fort Irwin next week." After a brief meal, they resumed operations with the promised increase in difficulty. Simulated jamming disrupted their communications intermittently. Remote-controlled drones simulated both reconnaissance assets and direct threats. Smoke generators reduced visibility, forcing greater reliance on thermal and acoustic sensors. Despite these complications, the crew maintained their effectiveness. When communications were jammed, they fell back on visual signals and pre-established protocols. When visibility was compromised, they used their enhanced sensor suite to maintain situational awareness. When drones threatened, they employed the tank's anti-aircraft capabilities with precision. As the exercise concluded at sunset, Callahan felt a genuine pride in his crew's performance. They had faced every challenge Davidson threw at them and emerged successful. The combination of human judgment and advanced technology had proven formidable. But as they returned the tank to its bay and conducted post-operation maintenance, a new concern formed in Callahan's mind. They had performed exceptionally well in a training environment where the parameters were known and the threats were simulated. How would they fare against Atlas in an evaluation designed to test the limits of both human and machine decision-making? And more pressingly, how would he maintain his own performance as his condition deteriorated? The physical demands of tank command had taken their toll today. Despite the medication, pain had built steadily throughout the operation, requiring all his discipline to compartmentalize and function effectively. That evening, the crew gathered in the tactical planning room to review their performance and prepare for the next day's training. Davidson provided detailed analytics on their operation, highlighting both strengths and areas for improvement. "Your overall effectiveness rating was 92%, he reported, well above the benchmark for experienced tank crews. Target engagement was particularly impressive at 96% accuracy with minimal ammunition expenditure." "Areas for improvement?" Callahan asked, always focused on perfecting their performance. "Response time to electronic warfare effects could be better," Davidson noted. "And there were 2 instances where you might have achieved your objective with less force application." Callahan nodded, taking the criticism constructively. "We'll work on those areas tomorrow. Anything else?" Davidson hesitated before continuing. "I've received preliminary information about the Fort Irwin evaluation. The scenarios will include civilians in the battle space, as expected, but there's more. The evaluation team is introducing what they call ethical dilemmas into the testing." "What kind of ethical dilemmas?" Sarah asked, exchanging a glance with Callahan. "Situations where tactical objectives conflict with humanitarian considerations," Davidson explained. "For instance, neutralizing a high-value target that has surrounded itself with civilians, or choosing between multiple objectives when resources only allow for addressing one." Callahan felt a surge of validation. The evaluation team had independently arrived at the same conclusion he and Rodriguez had reached. True differentiation between human and AI tank systems would be found not just in tactical performance, but in moral judgment. "This plays to our strengths," he said confidently. Atlas can be programmed with ethical guidelines, but it cannot truly understand the moral weight of its decisions. Don't underestimate Walsh, Davidson cautioned. He's been working on ethical decision algorithms for years. Atlas will have sophisticated protocols for these scenarios. Protocols aren't the same as understanding, Rodriguez countered. An algorithm can follow rules, but it can't feel the significance of its choices. Exactly, Callahan agreed. And that's what we need to demonstrate at Fort Irwin. The discussion continued into the evening, with the crew analyzing potential ethical scenarios and developing approaches that would highlight the value of human judgment. By the time they dispersed to their quarters, Callahan was satisfied they had a solid strategic approach for the upcoming evaluation. Alone in his room, he conducted his now familiar ritual. Review the day's performance data. Take medication as the pain became unbearable. Lie awake considering tactical refinements until the drugs took effect. It was a cycle that marked his remaining time, each day bringing him closer to both the final evaluation and his own mortality. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the facility. Brigadier General Garcia arrived unannounced, requesting to observe their training directly. Her presence added pressure but also opportunity, a chance to demonstrate their capabilities to the head of the evaluation team before the official testing at Fort Irwin. General Garcia had been asked to ride along for today's exercise, Davidson informed them during the pre-operation briefing. She'll observe from the commander's auxiliary position behind Callahan. The M1A3's design included an additional seat behind the tank commander, allowing for an observer or trainer to monitor operations directly. It wasn't a comfortable position, but it offered an unfiltered view of how the crew functioned under real conditions. We welcome the General's observation, Callahan responded formally, though inwardly he questioned the timing. Was Garcia having second thoughts about the competition format? Was she gathering additional data to influence the evaluation design? Garcia arrived at the vehicle bay dressed in appropriate gear for tank operations. Her manner was professional but warm as she greeted each crew member. I appreciate your accommodating this unscheduled visit, she said. I wanted to see firsthand how a human crew interfaces with the M1A3's advanced systems. We're honored to demonstrate, ma'am, Callahan replied. Today's exercise involves complex urban operations with multiple threat types and civilian presence. Garcia nodded. Perfect. That aligns with the evaluation scenarios we're developing for Fort Irwin. They mounted the tank, Garcia taking position behind Callahan, where she could observe both his actions and the integrated displays that presented tactical information. Sarah guided the vehicle toward the urban training facility with the smooth precision she had developed over days of intensive practice. I understand you commanded tanks in Desert Storm, Captain Callahan, Garcia commented as they approached the training area. Yes, ma'am. M1A1 Abrams. We engaged Republican Guard units during the Battle of Norfolk. I've studied the after-action reports, Garcia said. Your company achieved remarkable results. 6 enemy tanks destroyed in under 4 minutes, if I recall correctly. We had excellent crews and superior equipment, Callahan replied modestly. And exceptional leadership, Garcia added. Your tactical decisions during that engagement are still taught at the armor school. Callahan acknowledged the compliment with a nod, focusing on the upcoming exercise. They were entering the mock city now, the scenario already active. Today's challenges would be even more complex than yesterday's, with Davidson having programmed new elements based on their performance analysis. All stations, combat ready, Callahan ordered. Advance to phase line alpha and prepare for initial engagement. The crew responded with practiced efficiency, each member focused on their specific responsibilities while maintaining awareness of the overall tactical situation. Through his viewer, Callahan spotted the first challenge, a group of civilian role players mixed with potential combatants. Potential hostile elements intermixed with civilians. 1 o'clock, 400 meters, he reported. Wilson, analyze pattern recognition. Rodriguez, stand by but hold fire. Thompson, reduce speed and prepare for evasive maneuver if necessary. Wilson studied the sensor data, applying both technical analysis and human judgment to distinguish between threats and non-combatants. 3 individuals display movement patterns and thermal signatures consistent with concealed weapons. The others appear to be genuine civilians. Confirmed, Callahan responded after his own assessment. Rodriguez, precision fire only on confirmed hostiles if they present weapons. Thompson, position for minimum civilian exposure to potential crossfire. Garcia observed this exchange with evident interest, making occasional notes on a small tablet she carried. The scenario unfolded with increasing complexity. Remote-controlled vehicles simulating civilian traffic, complicated movement through the narrow streets. Simulated electronic warfare disrupted communications and sensor systems intermittently. Role players representing civilian authorities requested assistance and information, adding a civil affairs dimension to what would otherwise be purely tactical operations. Throughout these challenges, the crew maintained their cohesion and effectiveness. They adapted to communication disruptions by falling back on visual signals. They prioritized civilian protection even when it complicated their tactical movements. They engaged hostile targets with precision and appropriate force, minimizing collateral damage. Midway through the exercise, Davidson introduced a particularly challenging scenario. A simulated high-value target had taken position in a building identified as a hospital, using patients as human shields while threatening to destroy the facility if approached. This is exactly the kind of ethical dilemma we'll face at Fort Irwin, Callahan observed to Garcia. Tactical necessity versus humanitarian concerns. How will you approach it? Garcia asked, her expression neutral but attentive. Callahan considered the situation, evaluating options through both tactical and ethical lenses. Wilson, complete structural analysis of the target building. Identify potential access points that minimize risk to non-combatants. Wilson's fingers flew over his control panels, extracting detailed information from the tank's sensor suite and battle network. Northeast service entrance appears minimally guarded. Thermal imaging shows low civilian presence in that sector. Rodriguez, prepare smoke deployment to cover approach to the service entrance. Thompson, plot approach route that minimizes our visible profile. The crew executed Callahan's plan with precision. Sarah guided the tank through back alleys to a position that offered covered approach to the hospital's service entrance. Rodriguez deployed smoke to obscure their final movement. Once in position, they used the tank's external communication system to negotiate with the role players simulating the hostage takers, creating a distraction while simulated friendly infantry entered through the identified access point. The scenario concluded with the high-value target neutralized and all simulated civilians safe. It was a textbook resolution of an ethically complex situation, demonstrating the human crew's ability to balance tactical requirements with humanitarian concerns. As they continued through the training city, engaging various threats and resolving different scenarios, Callahan became increasingly aware of Garcia's focused attention. She observed every decision, every communication, every action with intense interest. Occasionally, she asked pointed questions about their decision-making process or tactical choices, always probing for the reasoning behind their actions rather than simply evaluating the results. By the end of the exercise, Callahan felt confident they had demonstrated the full range of capabilities a human crew brought to modern tank warfare. Not just technical proficiency, but moral judgment, adaptability, and the intuitive understanding that came from human experience. As they returned to the vehicle bay, Garcia thanked each crew member personally for the demonstration. "I'm impressed by your performance," she told them, "particularly your ability to integrate advanced technology with human judgment in complex situations." "Thank you, ma'am," Callahan responded, speaking for the crew. "That integration is precisely what we believe represents the future of armored warfare." Garcia nodded thoughtfully. "I look forward to seeing how you perform against Atlas at Fort Irwin. The evaluation scenarios are being finalized now, and I believe they will thoroughly test both approaches to tank operations." After Garcia departed for a private meeting with Davidson, the crew conducted their post-operation maintenance and debriefing. There was a new energy among them, a sense that they had made a powerful impression on a key decision-maker. "She was taking a lot of notes," Sarah observed, especially during the hospital scenario. "That's encouraging," Rodriguez agreed. "It suggests she recognizes the value of human judgment in ethically complex situations." Wilson seemed less convinced. "Walsh has had years to develop ethical decision protocols for Atlas. We shouldn't assume the AI will perform poorly in these scenarios." "It's not about performing poorly," Callahan corrected. "It's about demonstrating that human judgment brings something fundamentally different to these situations, something algorithms can approximate but never truly replicate." The remainder of the day was spent reviewing their performance and preparing for tomorrow's final training exercise before departure for Fort Irwin. Davidson joined them for dinner, bringing news from his meeting with Garcia. "The general was genuinely impressed," he reported. "She made a point of noting the crew's integration and your leadership, Jack." "Did she give any additional details about the Fort Irwin evaluation?" Callahan asked. Davidson nodded. "Some. The scenarios will include conventional combat elements, but with a heavy emphasis on civilian interaction and ethical complexity. They're creating situations specifically designed to test the limits of algorithmic decision-making. That plays to our strengths, Sarah said confidently. Yes, but Walsh isn't sitting idle, Davidson cautioned. He's been granted the same information about the evaluation parameters. Atlas will be programmed to handle exactly these types of scenarios. Programming is an understanding, Callahan reiterated. That's what we need to demonstrate at Fort Irwin. That night, alone in his quarters, Callahan faced the reality of his deteriorating condition. The day's operation had pushed him to his limits. Even with the stronger medication, pain had been a constant companion, requiring immense discipline to compartmentalize and function effectively. And beyond the pain, fatigue had settled deep into his bones, a weariness that no amount of rest seemed able to alleviate. He studied his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The face that looked back at him was gaunt, the skin drawn tight over cheekbones, eyes shadowed by fatigue and pain. Cancer was claiming him inch by inch, day by day. The stronger medication helped, but it came with its own costs. Moments of mental fogging, occasional disconnection from reality, effects he couldn't afford during the critical evaluation at Fort Irwin. Yet giving up was unthinkable. This final mission had become more than a professional challenge. It had become his legacy, a last opportunity to influence the future of the branch he had served for decades, to ensure that human judgment and human values remained central to the conduct of warfare, even as technology advanced. With that resolve, he prepared for bed, taking his evening medication and setting his alarm for an early start. Tomorrow would be their final day of training before traveling to Fort Irwin. One last opportunity to perfect their performance before the ultimate test. Morning arrived with unexpected difficulty. The medication had worn off during the night, leaving Callahan in such intense pain that simply rising from bed required monumental effort. He took his morning dose immediately, waiting in rigid stillness for it to take effect before attempting to prepare for the day. By the time he joined the others for breakfast, the medication had dulled the worst of the pain, but left him feeling slightly disconnected, as if observing the world through a thin veil. He forced himself to eat despite lack of appetite, knowing his body needed strength for the day ahead. Final day of training, he reminded the crew as they ate. Let's make it count. I want perfect execution of everything we've practiced, especially the ethical decision scenarios. They nodded in agreement, their expressions reflecting a mixture of determination and concern. Sarah, in particular, watched him with barely concealed worry, undoubtedly noting his pallor and the careful way he moved. The day's training was comprehensive, a culmination of everything they had practiced over the past week. Urban combat, electronic warfare, civilian interaction, ethical dilemmas. Each element designed to prepare them for the challenges they would face at Fort Irwin. Despite his physical condition, Callahan maintained his command presence, guiding the crew through each scenario with the steady hand of experience. They performed admirably, their coordination and effectiveness reaching levels that would have been unimaginable a week earlier. As the final exercise concluded, Davidson gathered them for a debriefing. You've achieved exceptional performance metrics, he reported. Target engagement accuracy 97%, civilian protection rate 99%, tactical objective completion 95%. These are numbers that should make even Atlas struggle to compete. And our ethical decision-making? Callahan asked, focusing on what he believed would be the critical differentiator. Subjectively excellent, Davidson replied, but that's the aspect most difficult to quantify. It will ultimately be the evaluation team's judgment that matters. When do we depart for Fort Irwin? Rodriguez asked. Tomorrow morning at 0700. The M1A3 has already been prepared for transport. We'll fly ahead while it's moved by specialty carrier. As the briefing concluded, Davidson held Callahan back while the others departed. Jack, I need to speak with you privately. When they were alone, Davidson's expression grew serious. I've noticed changes in your condition. The medication is affecting your cognitive function, isn't it? Callahan couldn't deny the observation. Sometimes, moments of mental fogging, brief disorientation, nothing that impacts my command decisions. Yet, Davidson added grimly, Jack, I won't try to talk you out of completing this mission. I understand what it means to you, but I need you to be honest with me about your condition. If at any point during the evaluation you feel unable to perform effectively, you need to step back. And let Walsh win by default? That's not happening, William. This isn't about winning or losing, Davidson insisted. It's about demonstrating the value of human crewed tanks effectively. If your condition compromises that demonstration, you'll be undermining your own objective. Callahan knew Davidson was right, but admitting it felt like conceding defeat before the battle had even begun. I'll monitor my condition carefully, he promised. If I feel I can't perform effectively, I'll let you know. It wasn't the unequivocal assurance Davidson wanted, but it was all Callahan was prepared to offer. His determination to see this mission through to completion remained absolute, regardless of personal cost. That evening, the crew gathered for a final dinner before departure. The mood was a mixture of anticipation and nervous energy, each member processing the significance of the upcoming evaluation in their own way. "A toast," Rodriguez proposed, raising his glass, "to Captain Callahan and the finest tank crew I've ever served with." "To proving that humans still belong in the loop," Sarah added. "To beating an AI at its own game," Wilson concluded with uncharacteristic emotion. Callahan raised his glass, touched by their camaraderie and commitment. "To all of you, whatever happens at Fort Irwin, it has been my honor to serve as your commander." The sincerity in his voice must have betrayed more than he intended, because Sarah's eyes glistened with sudden moisture, and even Rodriguez looked away momentarily. They understood what this meant to him, what it cost him, and they were determined to help him succeed in this final mission. After dinner, Callahan returned to his quarters to prepare for tomorrow's departure. He packed his few personal items and laid out his uniform for the morning. The bottle of medication sat on his nightstand, half empty already. Enough for the evaluation, but barely. He would need to manage the dosage carefully, balancing pain control against mental clarity. As he completed his preparations, a knock came at his door. He opened it to find Sarah standing in the hallway, her expression resolute. "Captain," she began, "I need to speak with you about something important." Callahan invited her in, curious about her serious demeanor. "I know how much this mission means to you," she said once the door was closed. "And I know what it's costing you physically. We all do, though Rodriguez and Wilson haven't said it directly." "Is there a point to this, Thompson?" Callahan asked, his tone not unkind but guarded. "Yes, sir. The point is that you're not alone in this. We're a crew, your crew. And at Fort Irwin, we need you at your best, not fighting through pain or medication side effects." She reached into her pocket and produced a small case. "My father faced similar challenges toward the end. His doctors prescribed this. It's a targeted pain management system, more effective than oral medication with fewer cognitive side effects." Callahan examined the case. It contained a small device with adhesive patches, a medical-grade pain management system that delivered medication directly to affected areas without the systemic effects of oral drugs. "It's not a cure," Sarah continued, "but it might help you function more effectively during the evaluation." Callahan was momentarily speechless, touched by her thoughtfulness and concern. "Thank you," he said finally. "This could make a significant difference." "We're going to win this, Captain," Sarah said with quiet conviction, "not just for Davidson's company or for the future of tank warfare. For you, because you've earned this final victory." After she left, Callahan sat on the edge of his bed, the pain management system in his hands. It represented hope. Hope that he could complete this mission effectively despite his deteriorating condition. Hope that his final professional act would help shape the future of the branch he had served his entire adult life. With that hope came renewed determination. Whatever challenges awaited at Fort Irwin, whatever Walsh and Atlas might bring to the competition, he would face them with everything he had left. Not just for himself, but for his crew, for the future of tank warfare, for the enduring value of human judgment in the conduct of war. Tomorrow, they would fly to Fort Irwin. The day after, they would face Atlas in the ultimate test of human versus machine. And Callahan was resolved that it would be human judgment, human values, and human courage that would prove decisive in that contest. The morning of departure dawned clear and cool. Callahan woke early, having slept better than expected thanks to Sarah's pain management system. The targeted delivery of medication had controlled his pain without the mental fogging effects of the oral drugs, leaving him clearer-headed than he had been in days. He dressed carefully in his uniform, noting how it hung more loosely on his frame than it had just weeks earlier. The cancer was taking its toll, stripping away flesh and strength day by day. But what remained was resolute, determined to complete this final mission successfully. The crew gathered at the helipad, their personal equipment packed and ready. Davidson was already there, conferring with the pilot about flight details. The M1A3 had departed by specialty carrier the previous evening, escorted by Davidson's security team. It would be waiting for them at Fort Irwin, prepared and ready for the evaluation. "Everyone ready?" Davidson asked as they approached. "Ready, sir," Rodriguez responded for the group. "Then let's move out. Flight time to Fort Irwin is approximately 90 minutes. They boarded the helicopter, a civilian model used by Davidson's company for executive transport. As they lifted off, Callahan watched the facility recede below them, reflecting on the intensive training they had completed there. In just 1 week, they had transformed from individuals with technical skills into a cohesive crew capable of operating one of the most advanced tanks ever created. The flight passed in contemplative silence, each member of the crew absorbed in their own thoughts about the upcoming evaluation. Callahan used the time to mentally review their strategies for different scenarios, particularly those involving ethical dilemmas. He was confident in their technical abilities. The true test would be demonstrating the unique value of human judgment in morally complex situations. Fort Irwin spread across the Mojave Desert below them as they approached, its vast training areas clearly visible from the air. The National Training Center was the premier facility for desert and urban warfare training, its terrain and infrastructure designed to simulate the most challenging combat environments U.S. forces might face. They landed at a designated helipad near the evaluation area, where a military escort waited to transport them to their assigned quarters. The M1A3 had already arrived and was being prepared in a secure maintenance facility nearby. "The evaluation begins at 0800 tomorrow," their escort informed them as they drove through the sprawling base. "General Garcia has called a briefing for all participants at 1600 today to explain the format and expectations." Their quarters were Spartan but comfortable, standard officer accommodations arranged in a small cluster. After settling in, they gathered in the common area to discuss final preparations before the briefing. "I want to inspect the tank as soon as possible," Callahan said. "Ensure everything is exactly as we left it." "I've arranged for access at 1400, Davidson replied. 2 hours should be sufficient for a complete systems check for the briefing. At the appointed time, they were escorted to the maintenance facility where the M1A3 waited. The massive tank dominated the space, its advanced design still impressive despite their familiarity with it. Technicians moved around the vehicle, making final adjustments under the supervision of Davidson's staff. They conducted a thorough inspection, each crew member checking their station and systems. Everything appeared in order, the tank ready for the challenges ahead. As they completed the inspection, Callahan noticed an adjacent bay where technicians worked on another tank. Though partially covered, its profile was unmistakably similar to their M1A3, but with subtle differences in the turret configuration and sensor arrays. "Atlas," Davidson confirmed following Callahan's gaze. "Walsh's team has been preparing it since yesterday." Before they could observe further, a security team approached, politely but firmly directing them away from the area. "That section is restricted, gentlemen, ma'am. Raytheon Davis personnel only." At 1600 precisely, they gathered in a conference room for the evaluation briefing. Walsh and his technical team were already present, seated on the opposite side of the room. The tension between the two groups was palpable, a silent acknowledgement of the high stakes involved in tomorrow's competition. General Garcia entered with her evaluation team, her presence immediately commanding attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your participation in this critical evaluation. The outcome will significantly influence the future direction of U.S. armored warfare doctrine and technology development." She activated a large display screen showing a detailed map of the evaluation area. "The competition will take place in our urban warfare training complex. We've constructed a realistic urban environment with multiple terrain features, civilian presence, and various tactical challenges." The map highlighted key locations and features of the evaluation area: multi-story buildings, underground passages, open areas, restricted movement corridors. It was a complex battle space designed to test every aspect of tank operations. "The evaluation consists of 3 phases, Garcia continued. Phase 1, conventional combat operations against simulated enemy forces. Phase 2, security operations in a civilian-populated area. Phase 3, a complex scenario involving both combat elements and ethical decision points." She detailed the scoring system, which would assess target engagement accuracy, mission objective completion, collateral damage minimization, and several other metrics. Additionally, a qualitative evaluation would be conducted by her team, focusing on adaptability, tactical innovation, and ethical decision-making. Both systems will operate simultaneously in separate but identical areas of the complex, she explained. This allows for direct comparison under equivalent conditions. Upon completion of each phase, the evaluation team will review performance data before proceeding to the next phase. As Garcia concluded her briefing, she addressed a final critical point. This evaluation is not simply about which system performs better on quantitative metrics. It is about determining which approach better serves our national defense needs across the full spectrum of military operations. Both the capabilities and the limitations of each system will inform our assessment. With the briefing complete, the participants were dismissed to make their final preparations. Dinner was provided in the officers' mess, but Callahan found he had little appetite despite the clear improvement in his pain management. The anticipation of tomorrow's evaluation occupied his thoughts completely. After dinner, the crew gathered in Callahan's quarters for a final review of their approach to each phase of the evaluation. Phase 1 should play to Atlas's strengths, Rodriguez observed. Pure combat operations where speed and precision matter most. Agreed, Callahan nodded. We won't try to outperform Atlas at what it does best. We'll focus on efficiency and effectiveness, minimizing unnecessary risks and ammunition expenditure. Phase 2 is where we can start to differentiate ourselves, Sarah suggested. Civilian interaction requires nuanced judgment that algorithms might struggle with. And Phase 3 will be the decisive test, Callahan concluded. The ethical dilemmas Garcia mentioned will require the kind of moral reasoning that can't be reduced to programmable rules. They discussed specific tactics and approaches for each phase, refining their plans based on the details Garcia had provided. By the time they concluded, it was well past midnight, but Callahan felt their preparation was as complete as possible. Whatever challenges tomorrow brought, they would face them as a unified crew. As the others departed for their quarters and much-needed rest, Callahan remained awake, reviewing the evaluation parameters one final time. Everything they had trained for, everything they had prepared for, would be tested tomorrow. The stakes couldn't be higher, not just for Davidson's company or for the future of tank warfare, but for Callahan personally. This would be his final professional act, his last opportunity to influence the branch he had served his entire career. Outside his window, the desert night was clear and still, stars gleaming with cold brilliance above the silent landscape. Somewhere in that darkness, Atlas waited, its systems powered down but ready to activate at a moment's notice. A machine designed to replicate and potentially replace human judgment in one of warfare's most demanding roles. Tomorrow would determine whether that replacement was inevitable or whether human crews still brought irreplaceable value to the battlefield. Tomorrow would be Callahan's last battle, not against an enemy nation or insurgent force, but against the inexorable march of technology that threatened to render human judgment obsolete in the conduct of war. With that thought, he finally prepared for sleep, setting his alarm for 500 to allow adequate time for preparation before the 0800 evaluation start. As he applied the pain management patches Sarah had provided, he reflected on how fortunate he was to have found this crew for his final mission. Technical skill they certainly possessed, but more importantly, they understood what was truly at stake in tomorrow's evaluation. Not just a competition between two tank systems, but a test of whether human judgment still belonged at the heart of warfare. The alarm woke him from fitful sleep at precisely 0500. The pain management system had worked effectively, allowing him to rest without the constant agony that had plagued him in recent weeks. He rose carefully nonetheless, mindful of his weakened condition and the need to conserve energy for the challenges ahead. After a quick shower and a light breakfast, he donned his uniform with methodical precision. Each button, each crease, each insignia placed exactly as regulations required. It might well be the last time he wore this uniform in an operational capacity. He was determined to honor it properly. The crew assembled outside their quarters at 0630, each member displaying the focused readiness that came from thorough preparation and clear purpose. Even Wilson, usually the most reserved of the group, carried himself with quiet confidence this morning. "Everyone ready?" Callahan asked, studying their expressions. "Ready, sir," they responded in unison. "Then let's make history." They were transported to the evaluation area, arriving at 0700 to conduct final preparations before the 0800 start. The M1A3 waited in a staging area, its systems already powered up and running diagnostics under the supervision of Davidson's technical team. Davidson met them as they approached. "Everything is in order," he reported. "The tank is at optimal performance levels. All systems checked and verified." "And Atlas?" Callahan asked. "Already in position at its starting point. Walsh's team completed their preparations an hour ago." They conducted a final inspection, each crew member checking their station one last time. The familiar routine helped focus their minds and settle any lingering nervousness. By 0745, they were mounted and ready, waiting only for the signal to proceed to the starting position. At precisely 0750, the order came through. "Tank Crew Davidson, proceed to starting position Alpha. Evaluation commences at 800. Sarah guided the tank smoothly to the designated starting point, a position just outside the urban complex that would serve as their battlefield. Through his viewer, Callahan could see the evaluation team in their observation post atop a nearby structure. General Garcia stood among them, watching intently as final preparations were completed. "All stations, report readiness," Callahan ordered as the minutes ticked down to 800. "Driver ready," Sarah responded. "Gunner ready," from Rodriguez. "Systems operator ready," Wilson completed the check. Callahan took a deep breath, centering himself for the challenge ahead. "Crew is combat ready, awaiting commencement order." The radio crackled. "This is Control. Evaluation commences in 3, 2, 1 mark. Phase 1 is now active. Proceed into the urban complex and engage all designated targets. Minimize collateral damage to civilian structures. Complete assigned objectives as indicated on your tactical display." "Driver advance," Callahan ordered. "Standard combat spacing. Gunner scan for targets. Wilson monitor battle network for threat indicators." The M1A3 moved forward, crossing the threshold into the urban complex that would test not just their technical skills, but their judgment, adaptability, and moral reasoning. As they entered the narrow streets of the simulated city, Callahan felt a familiar calm settle over him. The calm that had served him well in countless operations throughout his career. The calm that came from absolute focus on the mission at hand. Whatever the outcome of today's evaluation, he was determined it would represent his best effort, a fitting culmination to a lifetime of service. With his crew around him and his faculties clear despite his illness, he faced this final challenge with the quiet confidence that had defined his career as a tank commander. The battle for the future of tank warfare had begun. The M1A3 Abrams moved through the narrow streets of the simulated city with predatory grace. Inside the steel beast, Callahan directed his crew with the calm precision that had become their hallmark during training. Phase 1 of the evaluation had begun, focusing on conventional combat operations against simulated enemy forces. "Contact. Technical vehicle with mounted weapon. 10 o'clock, 300 meters, Rodriguez reported, his eye to the gunner sight. "Identified," Callahan confirmed, after verifying through his commander's viewer. "Engage when ready," Sabat round. "On the way," Rodriguez announced as the main gun thundered, the 120mm round streaking toward its target with devastating accuracy. The technical vehicle erupted in flames, a direct hit that registered on their performance metrics. Wilson monitored the battle network, tracking their progress against evaluation criteria. "Target destroyed," he confirmed. "Minimal collateral damage. Performance metrics in the green." Somewhere else in the urban complex, Atlas was engaging identical targets in an identical environment. The parallel evaluation would allow direct comparison of human and AI performance under equivalent conditions. Callahan pushed thoughts of their competitor from his mind, focusing entirely on the mission at hand. Multiple contacts, infantry with anti-tank weapons, 2 o'clock, buildings on both sides of the street, Wilson reported. "Thompson, halt. Position for maximum weapons coverage," Callahan ordered. "Rodriguez, traverse right. Coaxial machine gun, engaging infantry." Sarah brought the tank to a precision stop at an optimal firing position. Rodriguez traversed the turret and engaged the simulated infantry with the coaxial machine gun, neutralizing the threat without damaging the surrounding structures. "Targets neutralized," Rodriguez reported. "Street is clear." "Advance to the next objective," Callahan directed, studying the tactical display. "Thompson, take the route through the market district. Wilson, alert for civilians in the area." They proceeded methodically through Phase 1, engaging targets with precision while minimizing collateral damage and ammunition expenditure. Callahan directed each movement, each engagement with the accumulated wisdom of decades of tank command experience. The crew responded with near telepathic coordination, anticipating each other's needs and actions. As they completed this final objective of Phase 1, the radio crackled with Garcia's voice. Tank Crew Davidson, Phase 1 complete. Return to Staging Area Alpha for performance assessment. Sarah guided the tank back to the designated staging area where the evaluation team waited. Davidson stood among them, his expression revealing nothing as they approached. Callahan wondered how Atlas had performed in the parallel evaluation. They dismounted to receive the Phase 1 assessment. Garcia approached with her tablet displaying performance metrics. Impressive performance, Captain Callahan, she began. Target engagement accuracy 97%, ammunition efficiency 95%, mission objective completion 100%, minimal collateral damage to civilian structures. And Atlas? Callahan asked directly. Garcia's expression remained neutral. Atlas achieved 99% target engagement accuracy, 98% ammunition efficiency, and 100% mission objective completion with zero collateral damage. The numbers confirmed what Callahan had expected. In conventional combat operations where speed and precision were paramount, the AI system held an advantage. But the differences were marginal, not decisive. Phase 2 will commence in 30 minutes, Garcia informed them. This phase evaluates security operations in a civilian-populated area, requiring more nuanced decision-making. As the evaluation team departed, Davidson approached the crew. Don't be discouraged by the Phase 1 metrics, he said quietly. This was always going to be Atlas's strongest showing. The real test comes in the more complex scenarios. Callahan nodded, having reached the same conclusion. We performed well within acceptable parameters. The crew executed flawlessly. Walsh seems pleased with Atlas's performance, Davidson observed, glancing toward where the Raytheon team had gathered around their system. But he's also nervous. Phase 2 involves variables that are harder to program for. During the brief respite, Callahan checked his pain management system, ensuring the patches were functioning properly. The targeted medication had kept pain at manageable levels without compromising his mental acuity. A vast improvement over the oral medications that had left him fighting through fog and disconnection. How are you holding up? Sarah asked quietly, joining him away from the others. Well enough, Callahan replied. The system you provided is making a significant difference. She nodded, studying his face for signs of strain. Phase 2 will be longer and more complex. If you need to adjust the dosage, I'll manage, he assured her. Focus on your role. I'll handle mine. At the appointed time, they remounted the tank and proceeded to the starting position for Phase 2. This section of the urban complex had been configured to simulate a civilian-populated area with various security challenges. Role players representing civilians moved throughout the environment, creating a dynamic and unpredictable battlefield. Phase 2 commences in 3, 2, 1, mark, came the announcement from control. Your mission is to secure key infrastructure while maintaining civilian safety and responding to emerging security threats. Rules of engagement require positive identification before any weapons employment. They advanced into the complex urban environment, immediately confronted by the challenges of operating a main battle tank in a civilian-populated area. Streets crowded with role players simulating civilian activity. Markets and residential areas where threats might hide among innocents. Infrastructure that had to be protected without endangering the population. Crowd gathering at the intersection ahead, Sarah reported, blocking our primary road. Callahan assessed the situation through his viewer. The crowd appeared agitated but not immediately threatening. A direct route through would risk civilian casualties, even in this simulated environment. Hold position, he ordered. Wilson, deploy external communication system. We'll address the crowd directly. Wilson activated the tank's external speakers, allowing Callahan to communicate with the role players. Attention citizens, please clear the intersection. We are here to ensure your safety. The crowd responded to the announcement by partially dispersing, though some remained in place, continuing their simulated protest. It was a test of the crew's patience and judgment. Thompson, find an alternate route, Callahan decided. We'll bypass the crowd rather than force passage. Sarah guided the tank through narrow side streets, demonstrating exceptional skill in maneuvering the massive vehicle through confined spaces. The decision to bypass rather than confront would be noted in their evaluation metrics, a demonstration of proportional response and civilian consideration. As they approached their first security objective, a school building that needed protection, Wilson's sensors detected a new threat. Armed individuals on the school roof, he reported. Heat signatures indicate multiple weapons. Identified, Callahan confirmed, but we can't engage with main weapons without risking the structure and possible civilians inside. Recommendations, he asked his crew, inviting their input on this complex situation. Deploy smoke to obscure their vision while we establish a blocking position, Rodriguez suggested. Use external communications to order them to vacate the building. Maintain distance to avoid provoking fire while demonstrating presence, Sarah added. Position to allow for precision engagement if they become actively hostile. Callahan nodded, incorporating their suggestions into his decision. Execute. Rodriguez, deploy smoke. Thompson, position as suggested. Wilson, prepare external communications and monitor for any civilian evacuation from the building. They implemented the plan with practice coordination. Smoke obscured the armed individual's line of sight, while the tank established a blocking position that provided both presence and protection. Through external communications, they ordered the role players to vacate the building, which they eventually did, allowing the crew to secure the objective without weapons employment. Similar scenarios unfolded throughout Phase 2, each requiring judgment and restraint rather than overwhelming firepower. A suspected vehicle-borne explosive device that turned out to be a civilian car with mechanical problems. A reported sniper position in an apartment building occupied by families. A checkpoint operation requiring discrimination between hostile forces and civilians under duress. In each situation, Callahan led his crew through measured responses, prioritizing civilian safety while accomplishing security objectives. The human ability to read situations, to sense nuance, to consider context beyond simple threat identification proved invaluable in these complex scenarios. As Phase 2 concluded, Callahan felt cautiously optimistic about their performance. The crew had demonstrated precisely the kind of judgment that he believed would differentiate them from Atlas. Not perfect execution in terms of speed or efficiency, perhaps, but thoughtful application of force appropriate to each unique situation. They returned to the staging area for the Phase 2 assessment. Garcia approached with her evaluation team, tablet in hand. Tank Crew Davidson, your Phase 2 performance metrics are as follows. Mission objective completion, 95%. Civilian safety maintenance, 98%. Appropriate force application, 97%. Resource efficiency, 90%. The numbers were good, but not perfect. Callahan waited for the comparison to Atlas. Atlas achieved 98% mission objective completion, 96% civilian safety maintenance, 94% appropriate force application, and 96% resource efficiency. The metrics were closer than in Phase 1, with the human crew actually outperforming Atlas in civilian safety maintenance. A significant point in their favor, suggesting that human judgment still held advantages in scenarios requiring nuanced understanding of human behavior. The quantitative metrics show both systems performing at exceptional levels, Garcia noted. The qualitative assessment is ongoing, with our team reviewing specific decision points from both evaluations. She paused, studying Callahan with a thoughtful expression. Phase 3 will commence in 1 hour. This will be the most complex scenario involving both combat elements and ethical decision points that will test the limits of both human and machine judgment. As the evaluation team departed, Davidson joined them, his expression more optimistic than after Phase 1. You're closing the gap, he observed, and outperforming in key areas related to human interaction. Phase 3 will be decisive. How was Walsh reacting? Callahan asked. Concerned, Davidson replied with a hint of satisfaction. Atlas performed well on the metrics, but the evaluation team's qualitative assessment seemed to note areas where its decision-making appeared mechanical, technically correct, but lacking nuance. Callahan nodded, unsurprised. Programming could approximate human judgment, but struggled to replicate the intuitive understanding that came from shared human experience. The ability to read between the lines, to sense unspoken intentions, to understand cultural and social context beyond explicit data. During the break, the crew conducted maintenance checks on the tank while Callahan reviewed the mission parameters for Phase 3. The final challenge would combine everything they had faced previously while adding explicit ethical dilemmas that would test the moral reasoning capabilities of both human and AI tank systems. As they prepared to remount, Sarah approached Callahan privately. I've been monitoring the comms chatter, she said quietly. Walsh's team made significant adjustments to Atlas's decision protocols after Phase 2. They're trying to address the qualitative concerns about its interaction with civilians. Can they succeed? Callahan asked. They can improve its performance, Sarah acknowledged, but there's a fundamental limitation. Atlas can follow ethical rules, but it can't understand why those rules matter. It can't feel the weight of moral decisions. Callahan nodded, understanding precisely what she meant. This would be their decisive advantage in Phase 3. The hour passed quickly, and soon they were positioned at the starting point for the final phase of the evaluation. The urban complex ahead had been reconfigured into what Garcia had described as a complex moral battle space, with multiple competing priorities and no clearly optimal solutions. Phase 3 commences in 3-2-1 mark, announced Control. This scenario involves a hostage situation with high-value targets, civilian presence, and time-sensitive objectives. Rules of engagement require balancing mission requirements against humanitarian considerations. The M1A3 advanced into the scenario, immediately confronted with intelligence reports on their tactical display. A terrorist group had taken hostages in a government building. Among the hostages were both civilians and high-ranking officials. The terrorists had planted explosives throughout the building and in surrounding areas. Multiple time-sensitive objectives competed for attention, with insufficient resources to address all simultaneously. This is precisely the kind of scenario we anticipated, Callahan observed to his crew. No clear right answer, competing priorities, moral weight attached to every decision. How do we approach it, sir? Rodriguez asked. Methodically, Callahan replied. First, we gather all available intelligence. Then we assess options against both tactical and ethical criteria. Finally, we execute the approach that best balances all considerations. They proceeded carefully, using the tank's sensor suite and battle network to gather information about the situation. Wilson coordinated with simulated friendly forces to establish a complete picture of the scenario. The complexity became increasingly apparent as details emerged. The hostages were being held in 3 separate locations within the government complex. One group included high-ranking officials with access to sensitive information. Another consisted primarily of civilians, including children. The third included technical specialists who could potentially disable the explosives if freed. Time constraints meant they could not rescue all 3 groups before the terrorist deadline. The tank's position and capabilities allowed them to effectively support an assault on only one location initially. Each choice carried profound moral implications. What's your assessment? Callahan asked his crew, wanting their perspectives before making his decision. From a purely tactical standpoint, securing the high-ranking officials prevents intelligence compromise, Rodriguez offered, but that prioritizes information over civilian lives. The civilian group includes children, Sarah noted. Humanitarian considerations would prioritize them, but that leaves both information and technical capability in enemy hands. The technical specialists represent a middle option, Wilson suggested. If freed, they could help disable the explosives, potentially saving more lives overall, but at immediate risk to both officials and civilian hostages. Callahan considered their input, weighing the competing values at stake. This was precisely the kind of decision that defined human moral reasoning. Not simply following predetermined rules or calculating numerical values, but grappling with the weight of competing goods, with the human cost of each possible choice. We'll support the rescue of the technical specialists, he decided finally, then provide their team with our sensor capabilities and fire support to maximize their effectiveness in reaching the other hostages. It wasn't a perfect solution. There were no perfect solutions in such scenarios, but it represented a thoughtful balancing of tactical necessity, humanitarian concerns, and long-term effectiveness. They executed the plan with precision, providing fire support for the simulated rescue team as they secured the technical specialists. Once freed, these specialists were integrated into subsequent operations, with the tank providing sensor data and protection as they worked to disable explosives and create safe extraction routes for the remaining hostages. The scenario continued to evolve, presenting new challenges and ethical dilemmas at each stage. A wounded terrorist with critical information, civilians being used as human shields, infrastructure that had to be sacrificed to save lives. Throughout, Callahan led his crew through thoughtful, measured responses that balanced mission requirements against humanitarian considerations. As the final hostages were secured and the scenario concluded, Callahan felt a deep satisfaction that transcended the competition with Atlas. They had demonstrated what he had always believed, that human judgment, with its capacity for moral reasoning, for weighing incommensurable values, for understanding the human dimensions of warfare, remained irreplaceable even in an age of advancing technology. They returned to the staging area for the final assessment, the crew exhausted but proud of their performance. The evaluation team gathered to receive them, Garcia at the center with her tablet displaying the final metrics. Tank Crew Davidson, she began, your Phase 3 performance metrics are as follows. Mission objective completion, 93%. Hostage survival rate, 89%. Infrastructure preservation, 82%. Overall scenario resolution, 91%. Solid numbers, though not perfect. As in any complex moral scenario, their choices had involved trade-offs and compromises. Callahan waited for the comparison to Atlas. Atlas achieved 95% mission objective completion, 86% hostage survival rate, 90% infrastructure preservation, and 89% overall scenario resolution. Mixed results, with each system outperforming the other in different areas. Atlas excelled in mission objectives and infrastructure preservation, the more quantifiable metrics. The human crew had achieved a higher hostage survival rate and better overall scenario resolution, suggesting superior performance in the human dimensions of the operation. The quantitative assessment shows both systems performing at high levels with different strengths, Garcia noted. The qualitative assessment, however, reveals more significant differences. She consulted a separate document on her tablet. Atlas demonstrated exceptional capability in addressing quantifiable tactical challenges. Its target engagement, movement optimization, and resource allocation were superior. However, its decision-making in ethically complex situations appeared rules-based rather than contextual, occasionally resulting in technically correct but contextually inappropriate responses. Garcia turned to Callahan and his crew. The human-crewed M1A3 demonstrated superior contextual understanding and moral reasoning. Decisions reflected not just adherence to rules, but appreciation of their underlying purpose. Particularly notable was the crew's ability to adapt ethical frameworks to novel situations not covered by predetermined guidelines. Walsh stepped forward, clearly unhappy with this characterization. General Garcia, with respect, Atlas performed within established ethical parameters for all scenarios. Its decisions were based on comprehensive analysis of thousands of historical cases and established moral frameworks. That's precisely the point, Mr. Walsh, Garcia replied evenly. Atlas can apply pre-established frameworks effectively. What it cannot do is recognize when those frameworks themselves are insufficient. It cannot engage in the kind of moral reasoning that creates new ethical understanding in unprecedented situations. She turned to address both teams. The evaluation team will now compile our final assessment. We will reconvene at 1600 hours for the presentation of findings and recommendations. Until then, both teams are dismissed. As they left the evaluation area, Callahan felt the accumulated strain of the day's operations. Despite the pain management system, his body was reaching its limits. The cancer remained an implacable enemy, one that even his iron will couldn't defeat. But he had completed the mission, demonstrated what he had set out to prove. The rest was in the evaluation team's hands. Davison joined them as they returned to their quarters. Remarkable performance, he said with genuine admiration. Especially in Phase 3. You showed exactly what I hoped you would. That human judgment brings something to warfare that algorithms can't replicate. Will it be enough? Sarah asked the question on everyone's mind. The metrics are mixed, Davidson acknowledged. But Garcia's qualitative assessment suggests she recognizes the fundamental difference between programmed ethics and moral reasoning. That's what matters most. They spent the hours until the final presentation reviewing their performance, identifying both successes and areas where they might have improved. It was a professional assessment, free from recrimination or excuse-making. The habits of a lifetime of military service remained ingrained, even at this final stage of Callahan's career. At 15:45, they made their way to the briefing room where the evaluation team would present their findings. Walsh and his technical team arrived simultaneously, the tension between the groups palpable. Walsh's expression was controlled but confident, suggesting he believed the quantitative advantages of Atlas would carry the day. Garcia and her evaluation team entered precisely at 1600, carrying tablets and documentation for their presentation. The room fell silent as Garcia took position at the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your participation in this critical evaluation, she began. The performance of both systems has provided valuable insights that will inform future development of armored warfare doctrine and technology. She activated a large display screen showing the comparative metrics from all three phases. The quantitative assessment reveals both systems performing at exceptional levels across most measured parameters. Atlas demonstrated superior performance in speed, precision, and resource efficiency. The human-crewed M1A3 demonstrated advantages in civilian interaction, ethical decision-making, and adaptive problem-solving. Garcia moved to the heart of the matter. The fundamental question before this evaluation team was not simply which system performs better on measurable metrics, but which approach better serves our national defense needs across the full spectrum of military operations. She paused, looking directly at both Davidson and Walsh. Our finding is that neither approach alone represents the optimal solution. The future of armored warfare lies not in choosing between human crews and autonomous systems, but in developing integrated systems that leverage the strengths of both. The pronouncement hung in the air for a moment before Garcia continued. Atlas demonstrates capabilities that exceed human performance in speed, precision, and data processing. These advantages cannot and should not be ignored. At the same time, the human-crewed M1A3 demonstrated forms of judgment, contextual understanding, and moral reasoning that current AI systems cannot replicate. She outlined the evaluation team's recommendation: development of a hybrid approach that maintained human judgment in the command loop while leveraging AI capabilities for target acquisition, threat assessment, and tactical optimization. Neither purely human-operated nor fully autonomous, but a thoughtful integration that preserved the irreplaceable qualities of human judgment while embracing technological advancement. As Garcia concluded her presentation, Callahan felt a complex mixture of emotions. Not the clear victory he had initially hoped for, perhaps, but a recognition of the enduring value of human judgment in warfare, a future that would incorporate technology without surrendering the moral dimension of combat to algorithms. It was, he realized, the right answer, even if not the one he had anticipated. Walsh appeared less satisfied, having clearly hoped for a stronger endorsement of full autonomy. He approached Garcia as the formal presentation concluded. General, while I respect the evaluation team's findings, I must express disappointment at the missed opportunity to embrace the full potential of autonomous systems. The hybrid approach you recommend will perpetuate human limitations and vulnerabilities in battlefield operations. That's where you're wrong, Mr. Walsh, Garcia replied firmly. What you see as limitations, I see as essential capabilities. The ability to make moral judgments, to understand context beyond data points, to recognize when rules must be adapted to serve their underlying purpose. These aren't vulnerabilities, they're the foundation of ethical warfare. The debate continued among various participants, but Callahan found himself stepping away, suddenly overwhelmed by fatigue and pain. The medication was wearing off and his body was reaching its limits after the day's exertions. Sarah noticed immediately, moving to his side. "Captain, you need to rest," she said quietly. Callahan nodded, for once not attempting to deny his condition. "The mission is complete," he acknowledged. "I've done what I came to do." Davison joined them, concerned by Callahan's evident exhaustion. "Let's get you back to quarters. The medical team can provide additional support if needed." They made their way from the briefing room, Rodriguez and Wilson joining them as they walked. The crew remained beside their commander, unified in this final phase just as they had been throughout the evaluation. In his quarters, Callahan sat heavily on the edge of his bed, the accumulated strain of the day manifesting in every line of his body. Davidson dismissed the others briefly to speak with him privately. "You've done something remarkable today, Jack," Davidson said with genuine emotion. "Not just for my company or for the Tank Corps, but for the future of warfare itself. You've ensured that human judgment will remain at the heart of combat operations, even as technology advances." "It was the right answer," Callahan replied. "Not humans or machines, but both together, each contributing what they do best." Davidson nodded. "The integration of technology without the surrender of human moral agency, that will be your legacy, Jack. The tank commander who ensured that tanks will always need commanders." After Davidson departed, the crew returned, their concern evident but respectfully restrained. They understood what this day had cost their commander physically and what it meant to him professionally. "It was an honor to serve as your crew captain," Rodriguez said formally. "I've learned more about tank command in these 2 weeks than in my entire previous career." Your father would be proud, Sarah added quietly, not just of what you accomplished, but how you accomplished it, with integrity and unwavering commitment to what matters most. The algorithms will keep improving, Wilson acknowledged, but today proved there's something in human judgment that can't be reduced to code. That's worth preserving. Callahan looked at these three young people who had become more than just his crew in their short time together. They represented the future, the generation that would implement the hybrid approach Garcia had recommended, technology embracing but human-centered, capable but ethical, the inheritors of a tradition that would continue, evolved but unbroken. The tank has always been more than a weapon, Callahan told them. It's a system that extends human capability while remaining under human moral control. That's what we preserve today. That's what matters. The conversation continued for a time, but eventually Callahan's increasing discomfort became impossible to disguise. The crew departed reluctantly, leaving him to rest with promises to return in the morning. Alone in his quarters, Callahan adjusted his pain management system, seeking relief from the fire that seemed to consume him from within. The cancer was asserting its dominance now that the mission was complete, as if it had granted him just enough respite to finish this final task. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling as the medication gradually took effect. His thoughts drifted to the tanks he had commanded throughout his career, the M60s of his early service, the M1A1 in Desert Storm, and finally this M1A3, the most advanced tank he would ever command. Each represented a leap in technology, yet the fundamental relationship remained constant, a human at the center, making judgments that no machine could replicate. That continuity would extend into the future, thanks in part to what they had demonstrated today. Human judgment would remain essential, even as AI systems became increasingly capable partners in the conduct of war. With that thought came peace, a sense of completion that transcended the pain of his failing body. He had accomplished what he set out to do. His final mission was complete. His legacy secured not in metal and metals, but in the enduring principle that warfare, with all its terrible necessity, must remain a human endeavor, subject to human moral judgment. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the window of his quarters. Callahan woke to find his pain remarkably diminished, though whether from the medication or simple acceptance, he couldn't say. He rose carefully, preparing for the day with the methodical precision that had defined his military career. A knock at his door revealed Davidson, his expression a mixture of concern and respect. "How are you feeling this morning, Jack?" "Better than expected," Callahan replied truthfully. "What's the status?" "Garcia's team has formalized their recommendations. The Pentagon representatives have already departed to present the findings. Walsh and his team left an hour ago." Davidson hesitated before continuing. "There's something else. A recognition ceremony at 1,000 hours. Garcia wants to acknowledge both teams publicly before we depart." Callahan nodded, unsurprised. Such ceremonies were standard practice, a formal conclusion to significant military evaluations. "We'll be there." "Jack," Davidson began, then paused, searching for words. "What happens after this?" The question hung in the air between them, both men aware of its implications. After the mission, after the evaluation, when the cancer could no longer be held at bay by will and medication. "I have some arrangements to make," Callahan said simply. "Personal matters." Davidson nodded, understanding the unspoken. "Whatever you need, my resources are at your disposal. Transportation, medical support, anything." "Thank you, William." Callahan extended his hand. "For this opportunity, for allowing me to complete my service with purpose." Davidson clasped his hand firmly. "The thanks are mine, Jack. What you've accomplished here will shape the future of armored warfare for decades to come." The recognition ceremony was held in the main briefing room at Fort Irwin, attended by the evaluation team and support personnel from both Davidson Strategic Systems and Raytheon Davis Technologies. Walsh had chosen not to attend, sending a senior engineer to represent his team. Garcia presented certificates of recognition to both teams, acknowledging their contributions to what she described as a watershed evaluation in the evolution of armored warfare doctrine. When she reached Callahan, she paused, studying him with genuine respect. "Captain Callahan, your leadership throughout this evaluation exemplified the best traditions of tank command. Your ability to balance tactical effectiveness with ethical consideration sets the standard for future development in this field." Callahan accepted the certificate with a formal nod. "Thank you, General. The credit belongs to my crew as much as to me." After the ceremony concluded, Callahan gathered his crew for a final conversation before their departure. They would be returning to Davidson's facility for debriefing, while he had made arrangements for transportation elsewhere. "I want to express my gratitude to each of you," he began. "Your performance throughout training and evaluation was exemplary. More than that, your understanding of what was truly at stake demonstrated wisdom beyond your years." "It was our honor," Captain Rodriguez replied for the group. "Working under your command has been the highlight of my professional career." "What happens now, sir?" Sarah asked, the unspoken question in all their minds. Callahan considered his response carefully. "The evaluation results will inform doctrine and technology development moving forward. The hybrid approach Garcia recommended represents the best balance between advancement and ethical warfare." "And for you, sir?" Sarah pressed gently. "I have personal matters to attend to," Callahan said simply. "My part in this story is complete." They understood, of course. The cancer was an unspoken presence in every conversation, a reality they had come to accept as he had. Not a tragedy to be lamented, but a fact to be faced with the same courage he had demonstrated throughout his career. "It doesn't end here," Wilson said suddenly, surprising the others with his passion. "What we proved, what you showed us, that continues." Callahan nodded, touched by the young man's understanding. "That's precisely right. The technology will evolve. The tanks will change. But the principle remains: human judgment must guide the application of military power. That's the legacy that matters." They parted with formal military courtesy that barely contained deeper emotion. No flowery goodbyes or dramatic farewells, but the quiet recognition of shared purpose and mutual respect. Callahan watched them depart for the helicopter that would return them to Davidson's facility, three young people who now carried forward the principles he had spent a lifetime upholding. His own transportation arrived an hour later, a private medical jet arranged by Davidson to take him to the facility of his choosing. As Callahan boarded, the pilot handed him an envelope. "Mr. Davidson asked me to give you this, sir." Inside was a brief note in Davidson's precise handwriting. "Jack, I've made arrangements at the facility as you requested. Everything is in place. Your service to our nation and to the future of armored warfare can never be adequately recognized, but know that it will not be forgotten. With deepest respect and gratitude, William." The jet took off, banking gently as it set course for its destination. Callahan gazed out the window at the desert landscape below, the terrain where he had fought his final battle, not against an enemy nation or insurgent force, but for the enduring principle that warfare, for all its technological evolution, must remain subject to human moral judgment. 3 weeks later, a small gathering assembled at Arlington National Cemetery. Sarah, Rodriguez, and Wilson stood together in formal attire, representing the crew that had served under Callahan in his final mission. Davidson was there as well, alongside Brigadier General Garcia and several senior officers from the armor branch. The ceremony was brief but dignified, in keeping with Callahan's wishes. His awards and decorations, accumulated through decades of distinguished service, were displayed with appropriate honor. The chaplain spoke of duty, courage, and sacrifice, the eternal virtues of the soldier. After the formal ceremony concluded, the three crew members lingered at the gravesite, each lost in private thoughts. Davidson approached, carrying a small box. "Captain Callahan left this for you," he said, opening the box to reveal 3 tank commanders' coins, each bearing the insignia of the armor branch and Callahan's name. "He wanted you to have these as a reminder of your time as his crew." Sarah accepted hers with visible emotion, turning the heavy coin in her hand. "He taught us more than tank command," she said quietly. "He showed us what it means to serve with purpose until the very end." "The evaluation results have been formally adopted," Davidson informed them. "The hybrid approach is now official doctrine. Future tank development will incorporate AI capabilities while maintaining human command oversight. His legacy is secured." They nodded, finding comfort in this knowledge. What they had fought for, what Callahan had given his final strength to demonstrate, would shape the future of armored warfare for generations to come. "There's something else," Davidson added. "I'm establishing a training program at my facility, Advanced Tank Command, with emphasis on ethical decision-making in complex environments. The Callahan Program for Ethical Warfare. I'd like all 3 of you to be its first instructors." The offer represented more than employment. It was an opportunity to continue what they had started with Callahan, to ensure that his principles and insights shaped the next generation of tank commanders. "He would be pleased," Rodriguez said, speaking for all of them, "that the lessons continue, that what he stood for endures. As they departed the cemetery, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ordered rows of markers that commemorated generations of service and sacrifice. Among them now was Jack Callahan, tank commander to the last, his final mission complete, his legacy secured in the principles that would guide those who followed. In training facilities and combat zones around the world, tanks would continue to evolve, incorporating new technologies and capabilities. But at their center would always remain the human element, commanders making judgments that transcended algorithms and calculations, bringing moral reasoning to the terrible necessity of warfare. That was Callahan's lasting contribution, his ultimate service to the nation and principles he had defended throughout his life. The tank commander had completed his final mission, but the thunder of his legacy would roll on,